The bells in King's Landing seemed to toll a bleak and hollow tune that morning, their echoes winding through the humid air and fading among the high stone walls. The city had been rife with fear and speculation since the death of King Joffrey Baratheon at his own wedding feast. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some insisted it was Tyrion Lannister, the imp, who had poisoned the king. Others whispered darker conspiracies involving the Tyrells, or even Varys the Spider. Tension mounted in every alley and courtyard, with merchants closing their stalls early, and gold cloaks patrolling the streets in squads of 4 or more. The shadows of the Red Keep loomed over the city like a threat, as though they might engulf the denizens in a wave of new horrors at any moment. For hours, the accusations had fixed upon Tyrion as the one who had handed Joffrey the poisoned cup. Cersei Lannister's shrill cries at the feast still echoed through the halls. Her finger pointed, her voice trembling with a mother's fury and a woman's hatred for her youngest brother. Ser Meryn Trant had seized Tyrion on the spot, while the High Septon, half-blinded by panic, had called for an immediate arrest. And so Tyrion languished in a black cell for days. The trial began in haste, with every manner of evidence twisted to prove the imp's guilt. Witness after witness spun damning tales, while Tyrion's protests fell upon ears deafened by the Queen Regent's wrath. But on this day, the bells tolled in a new tone. A piece of evidence had arisen suddenly, brought to the castle by a half-dead messenger from Dorne, or so the rumors said. Perhaps it was from Dorne or the north or somewhere else entirely. The story changed with every retelling, but it was a scrap of parchment, they said, along with a small glass phial that had come into the possession of Grand Maester Pycelle. The phial, he claimed, had once contained the deadly substance called the Strangler. If the tale was true, the original source of that poison had been traced elsewhere. Whispers spoke of Littlefinger, of the Tyrells, of unknown conspirators. Whether or not this was exactly the path the Queen Regent believed, no one could say. Yet inside the Red Keep, tension soared, for if Tyrion Lannister were found innocent, what might that mean for Cersei's hold on power? In the late afternoon, King Tommen, pale, trembling, barely out of childhood, sat upon the Iron Throne, though one could scarcely see him behind the gilded spines of melted swords. Queen Regent Cersei stood beside him, her face tight, the lines at her brow etched deeper in the torchlight. Lord Tywin Lannister was present, as was Prince Oberyn Martell, Mace Tyrell, and the Grand Maester himself. Jaime Lannister leaned against a pillar to one side, ignoring the question in his sister's eyes. Varys hovered in the shadows, as was his wont, ready to supply what knowledge he possessed, while Petyr Baelish had not yet returned from the Vale, or so it was said. Tyrion was brought before them in chains. He raised his head, expression defiant, though his eyes bore signs of sleepless nights and frustration. The herald announced in a ringing voice that new evidence had emerged and that the trial would resume. No one in the hall missed the way Queen Cersei's hand curled against her side, as if she wished to strangle the herald then and there for daring to speak of Tyrion's possible innocence. The Grand Maester cleared his throat. His shaky voice, quivering with age, carried across the hushed crowd as he presented a battered scroll. It bore seals that no one immediately recognized, though there were scribblings in Pycelle's own hand upon the margin. There were references to a barrel of rare Dornish fruits, a mixture known to produce the Strangler, and a ledger that purported to show certain transactions that led to a mysterious figure not named Tyrion Lannister, nor any Lannister at all. The hush in the hall deepened as Pycelle explained, in his halting way, that the poison had been paid for by someone using the sigil of House Baelish. This revelation was staggering, and more than a few onlookers gasped. The hush threatened to burst into noise, but under the suspicious gazes of both the Lion and the Rose, the tension congealed into heavy silence. Tyrion stood as tall as he could manage, chains clanking around his wrists. "I've been saying all along, I did not kill my nephew." His voice was raspy. "Yet I stand here in chains, accused by my own blood. My father is here, my sister is here. If you truly see this evidence and still claim my guilt, then I see no justice in this court." He let his gaze wander over the lords and ladies assembled. Some wore masks of polite neutrality. Others were openly shocked, while still others, like Tywin Lannister, were inscrutable, The faintest flicker of surprise might have crossed the hand of the king's stoic face, but not even Tyrion was certain. Cersei's lips pressed to a thin line. She motioned for Pycelle to continue, though her posture was so rigid that it looked as if the slightest jolt might shatter her. The Grand Maester stumbled over a few more words before clarifying that the ledger showed repeated shipments of suspicious items, caged birds, rare seeds, potions of unknown origin, delivered discreetly to a warehouse on the outskirts of King's Landing, rumored to be under the control of Petyr Baelish. Several sums of gold were exchanged, culminating just days before King Joffrey's wedding, for a container described in code as gifts from Lys, which a skilled apothecary or assassin might identify as the Strangler. Pycelle, for once, seemed both alarmed and exasperated. "I would not dare cast accusation where it is not proven," he said with trembling dignity. "Yet it seems this implicates that Lord Baelish or someone closely connected with him arranged for the poison." All eyes turned toward Tyrion, who gave a grim, humorless laugh. "I have no love for Petyr Baelish, but if you are telling me that the coin used to buy this particular poison is tied to his name and not to mine, does that not suggest I'm not the culprit?" Cersei's face flushed. "You expect us to believe all of this? Petyr Baelish is thousands of leagues away in the Vale. He was not even in the city at the time of my son's wedding." She scanned the rows of onlookers. "Who paid for this evidence? Who stands to gain from Tyrion's freedom? My son was murdered. We cannot let this piece of parchment manipulate us into freeing a vile dwarf." Tommen shifted uncomfortably on the throne, looking as though he might shrink into the molten swords. Lord Tywin stepped forward, his composure impeccable. "We shall examine the evidence fairly. Ser Jaime, if you would." He gestured for the Kingslayer to accept the scroll and the file from Pycelle. Jaime took them, scanning the parchment with eyes flicking swiftly over the words. An uneasy tension lay over him. He was no friend to Tyrion in Cersei's eyes, yet he certainly shared a bond of sibling affection beyond what many realized. Oberyn Martell spoke up, the corners of his mouth turning slightly in a mocking smile. "It seems to me," he said, voice low and seductive, "that any man might pay gold and have it pass through many hands before arriving at its final purchase. Yet the question is, who had the most to gain by setting up the imp? The Queen Regent, Baelish, or another who has designs upon power here in King's Landing?" He cast a speculative look toward Mace Tyrell, who turned as red as wine at the insinuation. Lord Tywin addressed the Grand Maester again. "Is this ledger authenticated by any means other than your word? Could it have been forged?" The old man bristled at the suggestion. "My lord hand, I have compared the handwriting within the ledger to other sources I have from the Master of Coins records, the ones I had access to before your lordship and the Queen Regent took office. The script is consistent. The amounts of gold recorded and disbursed, as well as the code referencing the poison, were cross-referenced with private documents that only the Master of Coin or his direct subordinates could access. It seems authentic." A murmur swept through the hall. Those aligned with the Tyrells remained tight-lipped, while the Lannister bannermen cast watchful eyes at Cersei. In the distance, someone coughed, but otherwise the onlookers waited with bated breath. Cersei pressed a hand to her throat. The flicker in her eyes betrayed raw fury. She would not let her beloved Joffrey's death go unpunished. She wanted Tyrion's head, and yet the tides of evidence were shifting under her feet. The entire world seemed to tilt for her in that moment, threatening the precarious balance of her power. She had spent days stirring the realm against her brother, letting the rumor fester that the imp was behind it all. She had readied the small council to confirm the guilt and pronounce swift sentencing. Now, in this public forum, a wedge had driven through her best-laid plan. Silence reigned until Lord Tywin gave a curt nod. "Very well. Until further inquiry is completed, Tyrion Lannister shall remain under guard, but we cannot condemn him without exhausting the truth. Grand Maester, I expect you to deliver a thorough report of your findings, including any further documents. We will also seek out Lord Baelish and question him at the earliest opportunity." He turned to Jaime. "See that your brother is placed under comfortable house arrest, rather than thrown back in a black cell. He is still an anointed lord, my son, and stands under suspicion, but if the evidence exonerates him, then we cannot keep him in such disgrace." Cersei looked as though she might unleash a scream, but she must have seen the steel in Lord Tywin's eyes. Fury or not, his word was law at court. Tyrion breathed out in relief, though not quite victory, for he still wore the chains. Yet the Queen Regent had been forced to concede ground. Murmurs rippled across the throne room. Tyrion, in his typical dramatic flair, bowed deeply, though the gesture was clumsy under the weight of his shackles. And so it was that Tyrion was marched not back to his dark cell, but to a set of rooms guarded by half a dozen gold cloaks. He was searched thoroughly and told he would receive only a servant or two to attend to his needs. The door was locked behind him, but even this partial freedom felt like a reprieve compared to the stench and despair of the dungeon. Pausing near a window, he let out a shaky breath. The city sprawled below, 1,000 rooftops glinting in the sunset. He wondered how Sansa fared, wherever she might be, and a flash of guilt touched him, remembering how she had run from the feast. Tyrion had no illusions that Sansa Stark would love him or even trust him, but he hoped she had escaped the city's venom. If Baelish had a hand in all this, Tyrion feared Sansa might be caught in some web. In her own chambers, Cersei paced, refusing to sit even when Qyburn offered her a glass of wine and tried to soothe her temper. She could not allow Tyrion to remain alive and free. An innocent Tyrion would gain sympathy in the court, and he might even rally lords against her. She had no choice now but to learn the truth behind the ledger. If indeed Peter Baelish was behind the purchase of the Strangler, that meant the blame would fall on someone else's head. Tyrion would walk free. He might even be elevated in status as the victim of false testimony. Her father's hold on the realm would tighten, and she, Cersei, would become that much more powerless in comparison. She ground her teeth, pacing faster. Jaime entered, removing his golden hand from its leather sling. He let the door close behind him, ignoring Qyburn's bow. The tension between brother and sister had grown thick in recent days. Jaime stood silent a moment, watching her. She turned to him, eyes burning. "This is your doing," she snarled. "If you had pressed father to deny the evidence, or torn that parchment in half, or done something, we could have ended this. Joffrey's murderer would be punished. Tyrion's head would be on a spike, as it should be." Jaime's gaze hardened. "What would you have me do, sister? Falsify evidence in front of half the kingdom? Father would never allow it. And if Tyrion truly did not kill Joffrey, I won't see him executed on a lie." She stared at him, face twisting with rage and heartbreak. "He killed our son," she insisted, fists clenched in frustration. "He hated Joffrey from the moment he was born. He is a monster." Jaime took a slow breath, some part of him exhausted by her relentless mania. "Perhaps Joffrey was no sweet child," he said softly, "but he was still our son. Still, you must consider that Tyrion might not be at fault. There are other monsters in this world. Don't blind yourself with hatred." Her eyes flashed. "I will never forgive Tyrion. If he walks free, it will be a victory for him, and for all those who doubt my right to rule. They will see me as a hysterical woman who accused her own brother. They will laugh behind my back." Jaime closed his eyes briefly, remembering the boy Joffrey had been. Sadistic, vain, cruel, but also remembering the boy's vulnerable moments. Too few, but real enough to carve out a pang of loss. He let out a small sigh. "We will see what father decides, and what the council says. You have to let this take its course, sister." She did not reply, only turned away, hugging her arms around herself. Beneath her anger, a coil of fear wound tighter. She had staked too much on Tyrion's guilt. If he were proven innocent, what new position might he acquire in court, in the small council? Lord Tywin might reinstate him as Master of Coin or even something higher. The lords of Westeros might offer him alliances. Worse still, he might petition for some measure of vengeance for his false imprisonment. Cersei had known from the moment Tyrion was born, he would be the ruin of them all. And now, in the creeping shadows of her mind, she feared that prophecy more than ever. Across the city, in his modest tower chamber, Varys read the same parchments that Pycelle had read, copies that had come into his possession. He tapped a finger against his chin, reflecting on the curious turn of events. Who had arranged for that messenger to arrive with such damning evidence against Baelish? And how had Pycelle been the one to present it instead of Varys himself? There were pieces of the puzzle unaccounted for. He allowed himself a thin smile in the privacy of his chamber. Often he had moved quietly behind the scenes to protect Tyrion, for the imp had a role yet to play. Varys believed it, though he could not see the future. The realm needed clever men, men unafraid to speak hard truths. If Baelish had truly orchestrated Joffrey's murder, it would not surprise Varys in the slightest. Littlefinger's cunning was legendary. So was his ambition. Though how did Lady Olenna Tyrell fit into this new swirl of intrigue? Varys was not naive enough to discount the matriarch of Highgarden. The cunning Lady Olenna could have easily orchestrated the entire affair, using Baelish's resources. But with Baelish absent, and Olenna departed for Highgarden after the wedding, the blame might shift to more distant corners. Nodding to himself, Varys stood. It was time to prepare for more questions, more quiet manipulations. One thing was certain. If Tyrion Lannister truly walked free and untainted by this scandal, the balance of power in King's Landing would tilt drastically. Meanwhile, Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne, lounged in his opulent suite, half-dressed and sipping a cup of strong wine. Illyria Sand reclined on a cushion beside him, trailing a gentle hand along his bare chest. "You seemed almost too amused back there," she purred. "Your expression told me you expected more from the Queen Regent's meltdown." A languid smile touched his lips. "I had thought to see her shriek accusations until she foamed at the mouth, but she has grown slightly more cautious now that her father is present. That alone is worth witnessing. She is cornered, but she will lash out like a wounded lioness." He sipped again, the wine sweet upon his tongue. "What we must watch for is who else might be implicated in the murder. Joffrey was no friend to Dorne, but I did not come here to watch a mere child choke and die. Still, the entire city believes that Tyrion was the poisoner. Now the story changes." Illyria's eyes glowed with cunning. "And how do we profit from this?" He brushed a strand of her dark hair from her face. "Wait and see. If Tyrion is innocent, Cersei is weakened. Lord Tywin might grant me certain concessions in the matter of my sister's death if he needs my favor now more than ever." His voice lowered. "We have not forgotten Princess Elia, nor the children. This rebalancing of power might serve us well, my love." Back in the tower rooms that served as Tyrion's new prison, the imp stared out over King's Landing. At length, a soft knock came at the door. A single gold cloak entered, followed by a servant with a tray of bread, cheese, and a flagon of watered wine. Tyrion grimaced. He had hoped for something stronger. Still, he was hungry, so he accepted it. The servant placed the tray on a small table and departed, leaving the guard at the threshold. Tyrion soon sat, devouring the bread as though it were the finest feast he'd had in days, which, in truth, it was. He mulled over the news. Baelish. The notion rang strangely in his mind, as if it explained so much about Sansa's sudden disappearance and the presence of the poison. It confirmed a suspicion he'd nursed since the wedding. There had been something about the awkwardness of Dantos the Fool, about the hurried approach to Sansa after the feast. Tyrion cursed himself for not acting sooner, for not protecting the girl. She might be alone and terrified. As for the Tyrells, there was still the possibility that Olenna had conspired with Baelish. Tyrion had known the Queen of Thorns to be sharp enough to slip a poison unnoticed into the wedding chalice, especially with a bungling jester at hand. Regardless, Tyrion's priority was to secure his own freedom. If he could find a way to prove, beyond doubt, that Peter Baelish had orchestrated this murder, he might break free of Cersei's lethal shadow once and for all. But that would mean confronting Baelish, who was rumored to be somewhere in the Vale, unless the man returned unexpectedly. Tyrion's only hope was to gather evidence in the city before the Queen Regent contrived a means to silence or kill him. Days passed in a blur of tension and speculation. The Lannister guards remained posted at Tyrion's door. Cersei busied herself with councils, though more than once her voice echoed in the halls as she argued with Tywin. The scribes in the Red Keep worked tirelessly to confirm the ledger's authenticity. Some noble lords started whispering that Tyrion might soon be exonerated, and the Queen Regent's standing wavered as fewer courtiers rallied behind her calls for Tyrion's head. Tommen, caught between fear of his mother's wrath and love for his uncle, did little but cower behind Tywin's robes in formal sessions. Oberyn quietly observed. Mace Tyrell spent hours demanding that his house remain free of suspicion. And behind the scenes, Varys coaxed each new rumor into a place of maximum effect, ensuring that the notion of Baelish's guilt steadily took root in the minds of the realm's key players. At last, Lord Tywin summoned an official inquest in the Hall of the Hundred Hearths, a more private chamber than the throne room, but still grand enough to accommodate high lords and ladies. The inquest would determine whether Tyrion should be exonerated or stand trial once again. With this new evidence weighed, on the morning of the inquest, heavy gray clouds blanketed the sky, threatening rain. The subdued light gave the Red Keep's stone corridors a dreary cast. Yet it did little to diminish the sense of importance as the lords filed in, lesser courtiers following behind, eager for a glimpse of the proceedings. Tyrion was brought forward, unchained for the occasion, though half a dozen guards escorted him. Cersei and Tywin sat at the high table, Tommen between them, looking dwarfed by the carved seat. Prince Oberyn lounged near the front row of seats, while Mace Tyrell fidgeted. The atmosphere was taut. Grand Maester Pycelle reviewed his latest findings, corroborating that the shipments indeed belonged to Peter Baelish's accounts, not Tyrion's. Those accounts indicated that a portion of coin had changed hands mere days before Joffrey's wedding. Ser Jaime testified that the handwriting in the ledger matched that of Baelish's known ledgers from his time as Master of Coin. Cersei attempted to insinuate that Tyrion and Baelish had conspired together, but no tangible link was evident. The hall listened in near silence as each point was laid out. Oberyn flicked his gaze between the Queen Regent and the imp, as if waiting for someone to leap up and brandish a blade. Eventually, Lord Tywin spoke. Tyrion, you stand accused of regicide. The evidence, however, points to another. Do you have anything to say to this council? Anything to add to your defense? Or any knowledge of Lord Baelish's dealings? Tyrion let his gaze wander from his sister's hate-filled eyes to his father's stern countenance. He took a breath, thinking carefully. I have long suspected that Lord Baelish was not to be trusted. I did not, however, suspect he might go so far as to murder the king. If I had known that, I would have spoken sooner. Joffrey and we never got on well, but he was still my blood. As for any involvement on my part, I had none. And I will stake my life on that fact. He cast a brief, hard look at Cersei. I think it's high time the city asked itself why Lord Baelish would kill Joffrey, and whom he might have acted with or for. The hall watched Lord Tywin absorb these words. Then the hand of the king turned to Cersei. Daughter, he said, his voice firm, the time has come to recognize that we must conduct a thorough search for Lord Baelish. If he has conspired with others, whether Tyrell or otherwise, that will come to light. But as of now, we have nothing that ties Tyrion directly to the act. Only speculation. Without clearer proof, the laws of the Seven Kingdoms say we cannot condemn him. Indeed, we must consider him innocent of regicide if the evidence is lacking. Tyrion felt something unclench in his chest. Cersei's face was a portrait of seething fury, but she managed to force out words of grudging compliance. I understand, father. Then I declare Tyrion Lannister released from custody, Tywin said, raising his head so all could hear. He shall remain at court to aid in uncovering the truth of Joffrey's demise. Should further evidence come to light, we will revisit the matter. But for now, he is a free man. He glanced pointedly around the hall. Let none here speak or act against him under penalty of law. A wave of murmurs swelled. Oberyn observed with a half-smile. Mace Tyrell looked vaguely relieved that suspicion did not settle upon his house. And Cersei glared daggers, lips pressed in a white line. The pronouncement was done. Tyrion was free. In the corridors that followed, Tyrion's release spread like lightning. Servants ran to share the news, Courtiers rearranged their alliances in hushed corners. Some called it a shocking twist of fortune. Others said it was the truth at last. Tyrion's name would not be spat upon quite so readily now. But some remembered Cersei's vow, that she would see the imp's head mounted on a spike. No one doubted her capacity for vengeance. It did not take long for that vengeance to begin brewing. Moments after the inquest, Cersei sped through the castle halls with a swirl of her gold-trimmed gown, sending guards scurrying out of her way. She had never felt so humiliated or undone. Tyrion's freedom threatened to undo her hold on Tommen and on the realm. Her father's pronouncement had battered her pride. She scarcely heard Tommen's timid attempts to speak with her. She brushed him off and retreated to her solar, slamming the door shut. Inside, she hurled a goblet of wine against the wall. The crimson liquid spilled down the stone in a slow trickle, like blood. She stood there, chest heaving. Slowly, she removed her necklace and placed it on the table with trembling hands. Qyburn was in attendance, summoned by her earlier to discuss strategies for controlling the spread of rumor. He hovered near the door, watching her outburst with patient eyes. "Your Grace," he ventured in a cautious voice, "we must consider the ramifications of this. If Tyrion is declared innocent of regicide, his status will be raised in the court's eyes. He might even use his newfound favor to rally men against you, or perhaps to bargain with your father. You could lose influence." She spun toward him, eyes bright with anger. "I know that. Do you think I'm blind? The question is, what can we do to stop him?" Qyburn pressed his hands together. "We must move carefully. Lord Tywin has spoken, and as Hand of the King, his decree carries the full weight of the crown. If you were to lash out openly, you would be defying not just Tyrion but your father. That would be unwise, Your Grace." She glared, lips parted, but the truth of his words sank in. Finally, she turned away, clasping her hands so hard her knuckles whitened. "Then we do it quietly. I want watchers on him at all times, his every move, every visitor. If we find a single shred of proof that he is still conspiring, we will drag him to the dungeon ourselves." She swallowed hard, voice dropping low. "And if no proof arises, perhaps we create it." Qyburn nodded slowly. "Discretion, yes. As you command, Your Grace." Outside her solar, Jaime lurked in the hallway. He had not meant to eavesdrop, but her raised voice was impossible to ignore. Hearing his sister speak of quietly removing Tyrion, even after the official exoneration, sent a chill through him. They had come to a precipice in their relationship, and each new day saw them slip further from the love they had once shared. Jaime felt a pang of guilt, for though he had never truly taken Tyrion's side, he had refused to see his little brother framed. He wondered if it was time to leave King's Landing, to return to some semblance of a simpler life. But he knew he couldn't. Love bound him, twisted though it was, and duty, and shame. So he would linger, caught between the two siblings who meant everything and nothing to him anymore. Meanwhile, Tyrion found himself back in his old chambers, the ones he had once occupied as master of coin. They felt colder than he remembered, stripped of the personal touches he'd once added. The furniture remained austere with only a few decorations. Still, it was a vast improvement over a prison cell. Podrick Payne hovered at his side, stammering out a "Welcome back, my lord." Tyrion managed a tired smile. "Pod, it's good to see a friendly face. I was worried about you." Podrick reddened. Ser Bronn was told to keep me away from the trial, but I tried to help, truly." Tyrion patted the boy's shoulder. "You've done enough, Pod, and you lived, which is more than I can say for many who get entangled in these affairs." Bronn himself emerged a few moments later, stepping into the suite with a grin. Well, you're not hanging from the gallows. Glad to see that. Though I've half a mind to ask where my gold is for the trouble I went to, smoothing over some of those damned rumors." Tyrion's chuckle was genuine this time. "All in good time, my friend. First, let's see how the wind blows. By tomorrow, half of King's Landing will hear of my exoneration, which means half of them will hate me a little less, and the other half will hate me a little more. Cersei is in the latter half. Bronn smirked. "I'll keep my eyes open." "Do that," Tyrion agreed. "I suspect we aren't out of danger yet. The Queen Regent has long arms and a penchant for revenge." The next few days saw a shift in the city's mood. Whispers of Tyrion's innocence spread, though some still blamed him behind closed doors. Gossip pinned the murder on Baelish, claiming that he had fled after unleashing the poison. Others speculated that Lady Olenna Tyrell worked with Baelish and that Tyrion was merely a scapegoat. Each rumor was more colorful than the last. The small council tried to project calm, but the truth was, King's Landing reeled from the sudden vacuum of certainty. A crowned king had been murdered at his wedding feast, and no one had been punished. Cersei's efforts to undercut Tyrion intensified. She planted seeds of doubt, hinting that the ledger might have been forged by Tyrion. But each time, Grand Maester Pycelle, feeling spurned by the Queen's previous humiliations, refused to back her, insisting that the ledger was authentic. Lord Tywin remained impassive, focusing the city's resources on seeking any sign of Peter Baelish's return. Jaime and the Kingsguard patrolled the Red Keep, a silent tension between the brothers whenever they crossed paths. Tommen was watched closely, never left alone with Tyrion. Tyrion, for his part, summoned such allies as he could, men who might be loyal or might be bribed into loyalty. He also sought audience with Prince Oberyn, whose interest in Lannister affairs ran deep. The two met one evening in the gardens, where the sun's last rays set the pale marble ablaze. As the Red Viper strolled among the rosebushes, accompanied by Ilaria Sand, Tyrion approached with measured steps. Oberyn's warm brown eyes flicked over Tyrion. "My lord, you have been unshackled at last. I trust the new freedom suits you." Tyrion snorted softly. "I'm as free as a lion in a cage with the door left ajar. My dear sister stands ready to slam it shut." Ilaria tilted her head. "Still, better than the dungeon." "Quite," Tyrion allowed. "I wanted to thank you, Prince Oberyn, for your fairness during the proceedings. You did not rush to condemn me." He gave a small shrug. "I only sought the truth, my lord. Cersei Lannister's anger is formidable, but it does not impress me. Now that you have this new lease on life, what will you do with it?" Tyrion glanced around to ensure no eavesdroppers. "For one, I must learn who truly orchestrated Joffrey's murder. If it was indeed Baelish, there may be others involved. I suspect the Queen of Thorns was at least complicit, but that does not absolve Baelish. No one can deny his cunning. And what do you gain from unraveling the truth?" Oberyn asked softly, running a finger along a rose petal. "A chance to survive," Tyrion admitted. "Every day I walk these halls, I risk an assassin's blade or a cup of poison at my lips. If I can prove beyond all doubt who was responsible, I might remove the last pretense Cersei has to aim that blade at my throat." He paused. "And I might find some measure of justice, for I do not enjoy seeing children murdered, even if Joffrey was not the gentlest child." Oberyn gave him a curious look. "And you would remain here in King's Landing, among these vipers? You could go to Casterly Rock, or across the sea if you so wished." Tyrion laughed bitterly. "My father has never allowed me any true role at Casterly Rock, and Essos holds little appeal, though perhaps I'd find a new life there, far from Lannister feuds. But no. For now I remain, because leaving would be tantamount to admitting guilt. I'd be a fugitive, forever dogged by the rumor that I killed my own nephew. Perhaps in time, if the realm no longer has use for me, I'll vanish. But not yet." Oberyn nodded, seeming to weigh the imp's words. "If you seek truth and find yourself in need of a helping hand, remember that Dorne values justice of its own kind." He smiled thinly. "And vengeance." Tyrion thanked him, uncertain what to make of Oberyn's guarded offer. Yet he suspected that the prince, driven by his own vendetta over Elia Martell's murder, might find common cause if it meant undermining the Lannisters responsible for his sister's death. The Red Viper was a complicated ally, but any ally was welcome at this point. Through it all, Cersei simmered. She kept Tommen close, coaching him in the ways of the monarchy. Each day, she whispered warnings about Tyrion. "He is cunning," she would say, He will pretend to be kind, but he only waits to destroy us." The boy listened with wide eyes, uncertain. Servants reported that Tommen grew quieter at mealtimes, sullen under his mother's relentless fearmongering. Even the High Lords began to notice the Queen Regent's shift in demeanor. She snapped at them in council, belittled them in front of their vassals, and demanded they swear unconditional loyalty to House Lannister. Some complied, others quietly bristled. Lord Tywin, exasperated by Cersei's inability to manage the council diplomatically, stepped in more often, overshadowing her. Rumors abounded that Tywin might remove her from the small council entirely, leaving her with only the title of Queen Regent in name. The Lannister patriarch had no patience for a leader who alienated vital allies. A fortnight after Tyrion's release, a curious rumor reached the Red Keep. Peter Baelish had been sighted disembarking at the docks of King's Landing in the dark of night, in the company of a small retinue. The rumors said he vanished into the city's labyrinth of streets. Some insisted he was en route to the Eyrie, carrying a young bride, but others claimed he was slipping back into the capital under a disguised banner. When word reached Tyrion, he immediately petitioned Lord Tywin to send men to confirm Baelish's whereabouts and seize him for questioning. At the same time, Cersei pressed the Gold Cloaks to do the same, if only to keep Tyrion from twisting the facts to his advantage. Tension soared as search parties scoured the city. For days, none found a trace of Baelish, and cynics claimed the rumor was false. Then, at dawn one morning, a Lannister patrol returned with an informant from the harbor who claimed to have seen Baelish slip onto a river barge heading north along the Blackwater Rush. Orders were issued at once. The patrols were to follow, intercept, and bring the so-called Master of Coin in for questioning. A sense of mounting anticipation filled the Red Keep. Would Baelish be captured? Or would he vanish again as easily as he had appeared? Cersei cloistered herself with Qyburn, devising ways to ensure that if Baelish were apprehended, he would confirm Tyrion's complicity. Qyburn seemed skeptical that Baelish would offer anything so convenient. But if gold or threats could do the trick, Cersei was willing to pay or threaten as needed. Tyrion, on the other hand, prayed that if Baelish were caught, he would not spin more lies. Even if Baelish admitted to having orchestrated Joffrey's murder, he might well implicate Tyrion just to spite him or curry favor with Cersei. Tyrion needed a strategy, something that would force Baelish's hand to reveal his true conspirators. He conferred with Bronn, Varys, and even sought the wisdom of Oberyn. Each offered a different approach. Bronn suggested hiring men to kill Baelish before the Queen could get to him, which Tyrion dismissed as too risky. Varys favored a more subtle arrangement. If Baelish were taken, Tyrion's allies in the dungeon could ensure that only the truth was coaxed out of him. Oberyn simply invited Tyrion to rely on Dornish cunning, though he was maddeningly vague about the details. Before any such plan could be enacted, fate turned once again. News arrived that the barge suspected of carrying Baelish was found abandoned upriver, its crew gone. A few miles north, a burned-out ferry station suggested a violent struggle. Bodies were found, but not Baelish's. Some rumored he was killed by bandits, others that he slipped away on horseback. Many believed it was a cover story he arranged, ensuring no one could track him. The Gold Cloaks returned empty-handed, frustrated and humiliated. No sign of Baelish remained. King's Landing erupted with fresh speculation, each rumor more outlandish than the last. Was Baelish alive or dead? Did he orchestrate the entire fiasco to mislead the Lannisters? Did the Tyrells intervene to save him? Or was the Queen Regent herself behind his disappearance, ensuring no one could contradict her claims? Tyrion observed it all with weary frustration, left with no clear answer. Cersei's mood deteriorated further. Late one night, she summoned Jaime to her chambers, desperation etched on her face. When he entered, she rushed forward, clutching his good hand. "He's out there," she whispered hoarsely. "He can still be found. Joffrey must be avenged, Jaime. I won't rest until Tyrion is dragged back to the dungeon. We can't lose. We can't let him slip from our grasp again." Jaime gently pried his hand from hers. "Tyrion is innocent. If Baelish conspired with Olenna Tyrell, then they're the guilty ones. Let it go, sister. Pursue Baelish, yes, but don't lose yourself in this vendetta against Tyrion. Her lips curled in scorn. You dare say that to me? Have you forgotten who we are? What we share? We lost our son. My firstborn. She pressed her fists against his chest. Tyrion took him from me. I don't care what a scrap of parchment says. He's behind this, and I will see justice done. Jaime's face hardened. Justice? Or revenge? The realm may not appreciate the difference. And father will not allow you to tear the city apart hunting a scapegoat. She sneered, stepping back. Go then. Abandon me. Her voice cracked. I'll do it myself. A pang of regret lanced Jaime's heart, but he turned away, unable to face her madness. He had lost the Cersei he knew, if ever he truly knew her. There was nothing he could do to bring her back from the brink. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the corridor. With each passing day, Tyrion's standing in court rose by increments. Those who once shunned him now dared to greet him with polite nods, or even approached him about matters of coin. Lord Tywin, ever pragmatic, recognized that Tyrion's acumen with finances and his cunning mind were assets in this precarious time. He invited Tyrion to advise on reorganizing the royal treasury, still reeling from the cost of the war and the wedding feast. Tyrion accepted, albeit warily, knowing that Tywin's approval would keep him safe from Cersei, at least for now. So Tyrion returned to the role of Master of Coin, unofficially if not yet titled, setting about sorting the crown's debts, renegotiating with the Iron Bank, and ensuring that gold flowed. The city's merchants, quick to adapt, resumed their old habit of bribing officials, but Tyrion, remembering his near-death experience, no longer indulged them so readily. Still, he was not above using their money to strengthen his position. What Tyrion most wanted, though, was clarity on Sansa's fate. If indeed Baelish had spirited her away, that might confirm the ledger's authenticity beyond any doubt. But in the swirl of official duties and the watchful eyes of Cersei's men, Tyrion had no means to launch a private search. He settled for sending discreet inquiries through Varys's network, hoping for a lead. Each day he awaited any news, an unconfirmed sighting in the Vale or the Riverlands or somewhere across the sea. Nothing concrete arrived. He cursed Baelish anew for using the girl as a pawn. That tension in the air, he sensed that something was about to snap, grew stronger with each sunrise. King Tommen's coronation ceremony loomed on the horizon, delayed after Joffrey's death but now unavoidable. The Tyrells pressed for an extravagant affair, possibly including Tommen's betrothal to Marjorie. Tywin agreed in principle, though he insisted on some measure of austerity to avoid fueling further scandal after the last disastrous wedding. Cersei balked at having another wedding so soon, but even she recognized that forging the Lannister-Tyrell alliance remained necessary for the realm's stability. Nonetheless, the Queen Regent's presence at any grand ceremony risked reminding everyone of Joffrey's death. Would a day of celebration turn to another fiasco? On the eve of Tommen's coronation, golden banners bearing the crowned Staglion sigil fluttered across King's Landing. Pyromancers tested fireworks near the Blackwater. Nobles from across the realm trickled in, though the attendance was less than it would have been for Joffrey's wedding. Many still feared the city's hidden dangers. In a private meeting, Tywin, Mace Tyrell, and other key lords finalized the ceremony's details. Tommen, overshadowed by the imposing men around him, merely nodded at the correct moments. Tyrion, quietly present at the table, found himself studying his nephew. Tommen was a sweet boy, gentle in ways Joffrey never had been. Tyrion wondered how long Tommen could survive in the Viper Pit of King's Landing once he was crowned. He vowed to protect Tommen if he could, if only to spare the boy from the horrors that had consumed Joffrey. That night, as the city prepared for dawn's festivities, Tyrion slipped away from his chambers and made his way to a hidden corner of the Red Keep, where he had agreed to meet an informant. He wore a plain cloak with a hood, hoping not to draw attention. The corridor was dark, lit by sporadic torches that cast flickering shadows. He paused at an archway leading to a small storeroom, but found no one waiting. Growing uneasy, he stepped inside. It was cramped and smelled of old parchment. Just as he began to suspect a trap, a voice spoke from the shadows. "My lord Imp, you arrived alone?" Tyrion recognized the accent, one of Varys's little birds. "Yes, speak quickly." The figure emerged, a wiry youth with a face cast half in shadow. "Word from the Vale, my lord. The Lady Lisa Arryn is dead. Rumor says Lord Baelish shoved her through the moon door, but he has claimed she committed suicide. The lords declarant in the Vale are in uproar. Some say Lady Sansa Stark is with him." Tyrion felt his blood turn cold. So he made it to the Eyrie after all. "Is she safe?" The youth shrugged uncertainly. "She lives, last we heard. Baelish claims she is his niece, Elaine Stone, a bastard. The lords might see through the ruse, but for now they keep quiet, uncertain if confronting him is wise. If the Vale lords unify, they might oust him. But Baelish has a silver tongue." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over Tyrion. Relief that Sansa lived, dread for her predicament. Why bring this to me now? Because soon everyone in King's Landing will learn of Lady Lisa's demise. If Baelish's hand is plainly seen there, it only strengthens the possibility that he murdered King Joffrey. The man is cunning, but cunning or not, he's raising suspicion in the Vale. Could be an opportunity for you. If the Vale lords move against him, he may be forced to answer for Joffrey's death. Or to make deals. Tyrion let out a slow breath. He offered the youth a small pouch of coins. "Thank you. Speak of this to no one else. Keep watch." The youth took the coins and vanished. Alone, Tyrion felt a grim sense of resolve. Baelish was consolidating power in the Vale, but perhaps he had overstepped by killing Lady Lisa. Sooner or later, he would slip up, and the truth of Joffrey's murder would be undeniable. If that happened, Tyrion might finally be free of Cersei's lingering threats. Yet Sansa remained a hostage in all but name. By the time Tyrion returned to his rooms, the sky over Blackwater Bay was lightening with the approach of dawn. A new king's coronation day had arrived. Tyrion changed into appropriate finery, black velvet with gold trim, and prepared to stand among the lords as Tommen was crowned. He was not excited. The memory of Joffrey's wedding weighed heavily on his mind. However, he had a role to play, and if he did it well, perhaps he would grow stronger in the eyes of the court. Soon, the great September of Baelor rang with solemn bells, far more measured than the frantic toll after Joffrey's murder. Rows of candles flickered along the aisle as the High Septon prepared the anointing oils. Tommen, clad in royal finery, tried to keep his trembling under control as he proceeded up the aisle. Marjorie Tyrell walked beside him, radiant in a gown of pale blue, though not yet his wife. Her future as queen was to be sealed soon enough. Cersei stood to one side, face pale but proud. Tywin was nearby, his presence dominating the ceremony without stealing its focus. Tyrion lingered in the gallery reserved for the High Lords, listening to the chanting of Septon's echo across polished marble. When the final vow was spoken, Tommen Baratheon was crowned king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. The crowd let out a cheer, though more subdued than the roars that had accompanied Joffrey's coronation. Outside, a few tokens of celebration soared into the sky, brief fireworks that popped and fizzled over the city. Tyrion watched, noticing that Cersei's expression wavered between maternal pride and raw anxiety. She clapped politely, but her eyes darted, searching for any sign of trouble. No trouble surfaced. The day passed with measured feasting. Tommen, shy but earnest, received oaths of fealty from various lords. Cersei, Tywin, and Mace Tyrell presided. Tyrion was invited to speak briefly on finances, praising the new king's commitment to stewardship of the realm. The applause was lukewarm but polite. The memory of Joffrey's choking haunted everyone, yet the feast ended without incident. Perhaps the city drew a collective sigh of relief. Still, all throughout the day, Tyrion was acutely aware of Cersei's gaze tracking him, as though waiting for him to slip. His sister never approached him directly, but he could feel her presence like a blade pressed between his shoulders. By the time the feast concluded, the sky was alive with stars. Tyrion excused himself, returning to his quarters, seeking a moment of quiet to reflect on the news from the Vale. He poured himself a cup of wine, ignoring the guilt that threatened to surface whenever he thought of Sansa's plight. A soft knock broke the silence. Tyrion turned to find Ser Jaime stepping inside, gold hand gleaming in the torchlight. Jaime nodded in greeting. "Brother." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "You've come to congratulate me on not being found guilty of another murder?" Jaime's mouth twisted in a wry smirk. "Not quite. I came to tell you to be careful. Cersei is not herself. She rants about you constantly. She's convinced that no matter what Father says, you are behind everything. And you? Are you convinced too?" Jaime shook his head. "No, I'm not. I told you I don't believe you killed Joffrey. And now that Father has exonerated you, I see no reason to stand against you. But I won't stand between you and Cersei's wrath forever." Tyrion nodded slowly, draining his wine. "I never asked you to. She's your twin, and you love her in your own way. You saved me once, reminding Father I am still his son. I can't ask for more." Jaime glanced down at his golden hand. "Still be wary. She might plant evidence, bribe a witness, anything to discredit you. If that fails, she might resort to less public methods. A dagger in the dark, a poison in your cup. Don't let your guard down." Tyrion breathed out a humorless laugh. "I never do. But thank you, Jaime." An uneasy silence stretched between the brothers. Finally, Jaime turned to go. At the door, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. "Look after yourself," he murmured. "That's all I can say." And then he was gone, leaving Tyrion with the weight of his warning. The day that should have been a small triumph, standing freely among the court, felt overshadowed by the specter of coming conflict. Tyrion wandered to the window, gazing at the flickering lights of the city below. The drizzle of rain against the stone sills mirrored the tension in his soul. He thought of Sansa, of Baelish in the Vale, of his father's stoic expression, of Oberyn's cryptic half-smiles, of Marjorie's carefully measured steps around the new king, and of Cersei pacing like a lioness behind bars. Nothing was resolved. Everything felt precariously balanced on the edge of a knife. Tyrion might be proven innocent in name, but Cersei's rage still crackled around him. He could feel it like a storm building on a distant horizon. Yet for all her fury, she could not undo what had been done. The realm believed Tyrion was not Joffrey's murderer, and that shift in perception would strengthen his hand with each passing day. He only needed time, and perhaps one more stroke of luck, to see Baelish's guilt laid bare. If the day came when the city recognized the truth, Cersei would find herself facing a new reality. Tyrion not as the family disgrace, but as the cunning lion who emerged unbroken from her attempts to destroy him. If he could survive that long, the game would change forever. And so he stood there, far into the night, alone with his thoughts, the patter of rain on stone his only companion. Tomorrow would bring new schemes and new dangers, for in King's Landing the shadows never stayed still. But Tyrion was free, and that was more than enough for now. He raised his cup of wine in a silent toast to the uncertain morrow and drank deep, savoring the taste of hard-earned survival. He slept fitfully, visions of daggers and poison and moon doors spinning through his dreams. Dawn came too soon, with a rose-gold sky that promised another day of machinations. As he dressed, Tyrion reflected on the steps needed to cement his renewed reputation. He would bolster his alliances, reaffirm the trust Tywin was beginning to place in him, keep the Tyrells appeased, and glean any new tidbits from Varys's whisper network. And quietly, in the shadows, he would search for a path to rescue Sansa, if such a thing were possible, or at least ensure her well-being. For no matter what he told himself, some part of him felt responsibility for her. She had been his wife in name, and she was a pawn in the Lannister game just as he was. Cersei, for her part, emerged to the council with forced composure, though a new line had etched itself across her brow. She did not speak Tyrion's name, but her gaze flicked to him often, as if measuring how far she could push before Lord Tywin intervened. Tywin spoke calmly of preparations for a campaign in the Riverlands, ensuring the realm's rebellious lords were brought to heel. Mace Tyrell proposed lavish festivities for Tommen's first official court session. Tyrion contributed pragmatic suggestions for reorganizing the city's bread distribution, subtly winning the approval of the common folk. The Queen Regent wore a brittle smile throughout, her frustration barely contained, until at last the meeting adjourned. That night, after another round of discreet inquiries, Tyrion received a coded note delivered by a hooded figure who fled before Tyrion could ask questions. The note read, "The Eyrie stirs. The seed of the wolf remains in Baelish's keeping. Allies within yearn for the truth of his deeds in King's Landing. Should the proof arrive, the veil may rise." There was no signature. Tyrion stared at the words, his pulse racing. This could be the key. Some ally in the Vale who wanted to expose Baelish's crimes. If he could furnish undeniable proof of Baelish's role in Joffrey's murder, the Vale might act against him. Then Sansa would be freed from Baelish's grip, and Tyrion's name cleared of all suspicion. He carefully burned the note, memorizing its contents. Already he was formulating a plan. Over the weeks to come, he would gather every scrap of evidence regarding Baelish's purchases and shipments. The ledger pages, the notes from Pycelle, the testimonies from warehouse keepers. Then, perhaps under Lord Tywin's authority, he would dispatch them to the Lords Declarant of the Vale. If the Vale turned against Baelish, capturing him, all of Westeros would learn the truth. The result would be chaos, but it would be chaos that served Tyrion's cause. And with Baelish unmasked, Cersei would have no scapegoat in the form of Tyrion. Her hold on the regency would erode further, and Tommen would slip more firmly under Tywin's influence. It was not an ideal outcome, but it was better than waiting for Cersei's next attempt on his life. He smiled grimly to himself. That was the path forward. Ensure Baelish's duplicity was laid bare. If he succeeded, the memory of Joffrey's poisoning would no longer be a noose around Tyrion's neck. The Queen Regent might rant and rave, but she would find no audience for her accusations. Perhaps, at long last, Tyrion would stand on level ground with his father, recognized for his cunning rather than scorned for his stature. The realm would see him not as a monster, but as a man who had survived injustice and triumphed over it. Of course, Baelish was cunning beyond measure. Tyrion would have to move carefully, for a cornered fox was the most dangerous. But Tyrion had faced danger all his life. He would not cower now. He would meet cunning with cunning, half a step at a time, until at last Peter Baelish answered for his crimes. And perhaps, in that uncertain future, Tyrion would have the freedom to journey beyond the Red Keep's walls, to find a place where he could live without a dagger at his throat. Perhaps he might even dare to be happy. For the moment, he only knew that every breath, every heartbeat, was a victory over the fate his sister had planned for him. Tyrion Lannister, proven innocent, stood poised to shape his own destiny in a court as treacherous as any labyrinth. And if fortune smiled, he might just outmaneuver every threat in his path. Sleep found him late that night, a small flame dancing in the hearth. Outside, the city shifted and murmured, oblivious to the quiet revolution unfolding within its walls. Tyrion dreamt of distant landscapes and unknown roads, an open horizon beyond the bitterness that had dogged his life. He did not know if he would ever truly escape the game, but for now the game was his to play, and with that sliver of hope he drifted off. When morning came, he rose, newly resolved, and dressed to attend the small council. He would maneuver, scheme, and endure the same way he always had. Only this time, he did so without the specter of a trial for regicide looming over his head. Cersei might mutter and glare, but the realm had shifted under her feet. By saving himself from her accusations, Tyrion had cracked the foundation of her power. How quickly it might crumble depended on what moves came next. Thus began a new chapter in King's Landing, with the imp standing in the sunlight once reserved for taller men, and Cersei forced to consider the unthinkable, that she could be wrong, and that Tyrion might yet prevail. The bells tolled in the distance again that morning, though their tune now seemed uncertain, neither fully mournful nor celebratory. As Tyrion walked into the council chamber, he lifted his chin. The war for the truth was not over, but for the first time, he felt as though he truly had a fighting chance. And in King's Landing, A chance was all one needed to change the fate of kingdoms. Tyrion Lannister rose before dawn, roused by a swirl of anxious thoughts that coiled in his mind even as his body begged for more rest. He had slept perhaps 3 hours, haunted by half-remembered dreams. Baelish's face leering from the shadows, Sansa's voice echoing in silent pleas, and Cersei's eyes burning with hatred. A faint gray light crept into the sky, and the walls of his bedchamber looked flat and colorless. There was no point lying there any longer. He slid from the bed and padded to the table where last night's wine still sat. A single candle flickered, casting long dancing shadows. He drank what remained in his cup, the taste sour on his tongue, and dressed in plain breeches and a doublet of black. In the quiet that precedes the city's awakening, Tyrion left his chambers, nodding curtly to the Lannister guard stationed outside. The man bowed, but Tyrion could sense the wariness there. Cersei had watchers everywhere, men who would dutifully report his comings and goings. He needed to appear untroubled, even if every step felt like he was walking a plank above a nest of vipers. Tucking a roll of parchment beneath his arm, he made his way to a small courtyard off the Red Keep's eastern wing, a private place where he sometimes came to collect his thoughts. The courtyard was quiet, except for the chirrup of sparrows in the overgrown ivy. A single marble bench stood against a low stone wall. Beyond the wall lay a dizzying drop to the Blackwater rush far below. The morning air carried the chill of early spring, though the worst of winter was yet to come. If it was coming at all, Tyrion thought wryly, remembering the rumor that winter might arrive soon with fearsome intensity. He drew a breath of sea-tinged air, his mind drifting back to the coded note he had received. Some unknown ally in the Vale sought to undermine Baelish, urging that proof of his crimes be sent. The only question was whether Tyrion dared to trust a whisper scribbled on parchment delivered by a hooded phantom in the night. Even so, it might be his best chance to see Peter Baelish exposed. The ledger entries alone would be strong evidence. Varys's little birds had also unearthed scraps of correspondence suggesting Baelish had arranged shipments from Lys. The master ledger with Pycelle's notes, now locked in Tywin's personal study, could clinch the case. If Tywin agreed to send it north, the Vale Lords would have no shortage of cause to arrest Baelish. Whether they would or not was another question. Baelish had a talent for shaping narratives in his favor, and the Vale was famously isolationist. But Tyrion's best chance of ensuring Baelish did not wriggle free again was to flood the Lords Declarant with so much proof they could not ignore it. He was still turning the matter over in his head when he heard footsteps, soft against the flagstones. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see a gold cloak or one of Cersei's lackeys. Instead, he found Prince Oberyn Martell, clad in loose-fitting silks despite the early hour. A small smile curved Oberyn's lips as he stepped forward, Illyria Sand beside him. Tyrion straightened, schooling his face into polite neutrality. "You're an early riser, my Lord Imp," Oberyn said. His voice was low, warm as summer, each syllable gliding with the accent of Dorne. "I prefer to greet the sun on my own terms. The city is so much quieter before the masses awaken to their daily toil." Illyria Sand wore a cloak of shimmering orange pinned at her shoulder with a golden scorpion brooch. She brushed a hand through her dark curls, smiling softly. "We saw you heading this way. Thought perhaps you would prefer some company." Tyrion nodded, though inwardly he wondered if Oberyn had come to glean some new piece of intrigue. The Prince of Dorne never did anything without reason. "I welcome it," Tyrion said carefully, offering them a slight bow. "You're right about the city being quieter now, and safer for that matter if only because no one's awake to stick a blade in your back." Oberyn gave a low laugh. "In King's Landing, I prefer not to assume even dawn is safe. But your sentiment stands. Tell me, Lord Tyrion, did you sleep well after the coronation?" Tyrion gave a small shrug. "As well as a man under constant threat of assassination can. Your presence here suggests you might have a reason to seek me out. Or am I overthinking?" Illyria's gaze flicked around the courtyard, ensuring no one else was near. "We wanted to speak without prying ears," she said. "I've heard whispers about the Vale, Baelish, Lady Lisa's death, and a growing suspicion among the lords there that the new Lord Protector might be untrustworthy. Oberyn stepped closer, his voice dropping. Cersei is distracted by her personal vendetta. Tywin Lannister is more concerned with the realm's debts and the Riverlands. But you, Tyrion, you seem keenly focused on this business in the Vale. My question is, why? Tyrion weighed his words. Trusting Oberyn was risky, but the Martell had shown him a measure of fairness. Let's say, Tyrion answered, that I wish to see Peter Baelish held accountable for the murder of my nephew. If the Vale Lords decide to move against Baelish, they could undo his machinations and free the realm of a cunning manipulator. It would also ensure no one could accuse me of Joffrey's death. Oberyn studied him with dark, probing eyes. Fair enough. In that case, you might want to know that one of my captains claims a messenger from the Eyrie reached Dorne, seeking to broker an alliance. It seems certain Vale Lords are casting about for outside support. They want assurances that if they expel Baelish, they won't face retribution from the Iron Throne. Tyrion's breath caught. They fear Tywin Lannister might intervene on Baelish's behalf? That's madness. My father has little love for Baelish. Illaria's lips twisted in a small smile. It's no madness if they believe Baelish is still in good standing with your family. They may not know how precarious Baelish's position is, or how tenuous the Queen Regent's hold on him might be. King's Landing is a nest of illusions. The Vale Lords only see what gossip flows over the mountains. Oberyn studied Tyrion's reaction. If you can convince these lords that the Iron Throne, truly meaning Lord Tywin, will not interfere, they might have the spine to arrest Baelish or at least confine him. Once he's forced to answer for his sins, the truth of Joffrey's murder may emerge. Tyrion nodded slowly. This aligns with my own thoughts, but how do we ensure they believe us? My father doesn't act out of charity. He'll want something. Perhaps the Vale's fealty in quelling bandits, or a promise to keep the Arryn forces out of any potential alliances with the North or Stannis Baratheon. The Red Viper's smirk deepened. You sound like you already know the game too well. Dorne might be willing to facilitate these discussions. We Martells have no love for Baelish, and if it weakens the Queen Regent, I'm hardly opposed. But I wonder, is it truly just that you wish to unmask Baelish? Or are you playing another angle, one that might let you supplant your sister's power? Tyrion's grin was crooked. I wouldn't say no to the second outcome, but for now, let's just call it justice. I'll speak to my father. It's a delicate business. If I approach him too boldly, Cersei may learn of it and sabotage the plan. I need to be subtle. Ellaria gave a quiet nod. Whatever you do, be certain you succeed, my lord. Half measures will only drive Baelish deeper into the shadows, and you could find yourself with an even more dangerous foe. Tyrion took a breath. I know. Thank you both. I appreciate your insight more than I can say. Oberyn and Ellaria departed, their footfalls fading into the corridor. Tyrion remained a few minutes longer, watching the sun creep higher. He felt a glimmer of something that might be hope. Allies were not easy to find in King's Landing, but Oberyn's interest meant at least one great house saw potential in helping Tyrion. The question was whether the Martells were guided by altruism or by their hatred for House Lannister. Perhaps both. Tyrion shook his head. He could worry about that later. For now, he needed to find a way to approach Tywin and arrange for the ledger evidence to be sent to the Vale without inciting Cersei's immediate retaliation. He left the courtyard as the city stirred to life. The winding corridors of the Red Keep quickly filled with servants carrying trays of bread, salted fish, and jugs of watered wine for the morning meals. Tyrion made his way to the Solar where Tywin often held private audiences before the main council sessions. 2 Lannister guards stood at the door. Tyrion nodded, requesting an audience with his father. The guards eyed him uncertainly. Perhaps they remembered the Queen Regent's fury, but finally one stepped inside to announce him. Moments later, the guard ushered Tyrion in. Tywin Lannister stood by a long table piled with parchment and ledgers. Shafts of morning light through the narrow windows highlighted the silver in his hair. His expression was set in the familiar stoic lines Tyrion remembered from childhood. He barely glanced up as his son approached. Tyrion swallowed the memory of old resentments and bowed slightly, determined to keep the conversation civil. "Father," he said, "I trust you're well." Tywin made a non-committal sound, dipping a quill into ink. "I'm occupied, Tyrion, but well enough. What pressing matter brings you here at this hour?" Tyrion exhaled softly, steeling himself. "I seek your counsel regarding Baelish and the Vale. We've both heard the rumors that he murdered Lisa Arryn to seize control of the Eyrie. We also know he likely orchestrated Joffrey's death. If the Vale Lords are inclined to remove him, we should encourage them. That spares the crown the burden of capturing him ourselves." Tywin paused, quill hovering. He gave Tyrion a sidelong look, calculating. "You wish to see Baelish fall, obviously, to clear your own name once and for all." "That's part of it," Tyrion admitted. "But there's a broader advantage. Baelish is cunning, resourceful. If he remains in control of the Vale, he'll continue to manipulate events to his favor, and against ours. The Lords Declarant could unseat him if they had proof of his crimes and an assurance the Iron Throne will not defend him. Perhaps even your signature on a letter, stating that we do not recognize Baelish as the legitimate Lord Protector." Tywin's gaze was as cold as winter sun. "And what do the Vale Lords offer in return for my interference? Or rather, my lack of interference?" Tyrion forced a smile. "They might reaffirm fealty to King Tommen, pledge their knights in any campaign you deem necessary. The Vale has been quiet since the War of the Five Kings, but they still command a formidable host of well-trained men. Gaining the Eyri's goodwill could stabilize the realm's eastern flank." Tywin tapped the quill on the edge of the inkwell. "It could also provoke them if we appear too controlling. The Vale has historically been aloof. Baelish is a snake, but he's a snake who might yet serve our purposes if properly caged. That said, I have no personal loyalty to him. I'm not opposed to seeing him removed." Tyrion saw the opening and pressed. "Then let us act quickly, before Baelish cements his power. He's already manipulated Lady Sansa Stark into his custody, or so it's rumored. If he marries her, or engineers some alliance around her claim to Winterfell, we could have an even bigger problem on our hands." Tywin's expression hardened further at the mention of Sansa's claim. "Indeed, the North is a concern. Even if the Boltons hold it now in the King's name, the Stark line still inspires loyalty. Baelish with a Stark bride could be dangerous." He inhaled, setting the quill aside. "Very well, Tyrion. Compile the evidence regarding Joffrey's murder and Baelish's treachery. Draft a formal letter to the Lords Declarant. My scribes will refine it. If the Vale sees reason, we may stand aside and let them handle Baelish. But ensure your sister does not learn of this until it's done. She's too volatile on the subject of Joffrey's death." Tyrion bowed his head in agreement. Relief mingled with caution in his chest. This was precisely the chance he needed. "Thank you, Father. I'll see to it at once." Tywin nodded in dismissal, already picking up another scroll. Tyrion turned to go, heart pounding. The moment he stepped into the corridor, he exhaled, feeling like he'd just navigated a tightrope. He had his father's blessing, if only so far as it served Tywin's strategy. That was enough. Now, to gather the documents, he'd need help. Pycelle's ledger, the letters from warehouses, anything that showed Baelish's involvement in acquiring the poison known as the Strangler. And he would need to do it with the utmost secrecy. Cersei might not be able to block Tywin once everything was in motion, but she could cause plenty of disruption if she got wind too soon. He hurried along, mindful of watchers in every alcove. At his chambers, he found Podrick Payne and Ser Bronn waiting. Bronn lounged in a chair, feasting on a platter of spiced sausage, while Pod stood nervously near the door. Tyrion beckoned them both inside and closed the door. "Pod, Bronn, I need your assistance," Tyrion said, his voice low. "We're compiling a set of documents that prove Peter Baelish bought the poison used on Joffrey. Bronn, you'll fetch copies of shipping records from that warehouse on the outskirts of Flea Bottom. The manager, Rollo, owes me a favor. Use this." He handed Bronn a small pouch of coins. "Make certain no one sees you, then return here without delay." Bronn grinned lazily. "Sneaking around Flea Bottom in broad daylight? I can do that. And if any ruffians try to pinch me, they'll learn a few new holes in their hides. Tyrion turned to Pod. I'll need you to speak with Grand Maester Pycelle. He'll be suspicious, but show him this. Tyrion placed a small piece of parchment, sealed with Tywin's personal sigil, in Podrick's trembling hand. It authorizes the release of the original ledger for official inspection by the hand of the king. Pycelle won't refuse Lord Tywin. Make sure you carry it carefully. Then bring the ledger to me. Pod swallowed hard, wide-eyed. Yes, my lord. Right away. Good, Tyrion said. Once we have everything, we'll convene in private, sort out what's essential, and have Lord Tywin's scribes draw up a neat summary. No one else is to know. Understood. Both nodded. Tyrion ushered them out with a final warning. Be discreet, and be swift. Then he let them go, releasing a breath as the door clicked shut. Every part of this endeavor carried risk. If Cersei caught wind, she might find a way to intercept the documents. If Baelish had spies still lurking in the city, they might do the same. Tyrion poured himself a cup of wine and forced his mind to remain calm. He had played dangerous games before, bargaining with mountain tribes, negotiating with slavers and Essos, outwitting Stannis' fleet at the Battle of the Blackwater. The difference now was that he was not acting as Hand of the King with the city's might behind him. He was a single piece on a board crowded with powerful players. Still, he had something none of them could match. A willingness to see the truth laid bare, no matter how it threatened the Lannisters' illusions. He paced the chamber, waiting until the minutes blurred into an hour, then two. Finally, Pod returned, clutching Pycelle's ledger to his chest like a sacred treasure. The boy was sweating, face flushed. Tyrion locked the door behind him and took the leather-bound tome, flipping through it carefully. Pages of spidery script listed shipments, payments, and coded references. The Tyrell sigil appeared in some notations, the Baelish sigil in others. Tyrion paused at an entry describing an exotic sampling of seeds from Lys, accompanied by a caged bird. Payment rendered in coin by the Master of Coin's steward. It matched the approximate date that Tyrion suspected the poison arrived. Well done, Tyrion said quietly. Did Pycelle give you any trouble? Pod shook his head. He grumbled, said the ledger was vital to the realm's record. But once I showed him Lord Tywin's seal, he handed it over. I think he was relieved to see it gone, to be honest. Tyrion smirked. He probably fears for his life if the Queen Regent discovered him cooperating. But Father's authority trumps hers in this matter, for now. A short while later, Bronn returned with a bundle of parchments, each sealed in wax with the insignia of the shipping warehouse. He tossed them on Tyrion's table. Rollo was none too happy about rummaging through old ledgers, but your gold changed his mind. He said he remembers a funny little package from Lys that arrived not long before the royal wedding, paid for by a man carrying a coin stamped with Baelish's mockingbird. Here's the paper proof. Tyrion's pulse quickened as he examined each sheet. Yes, this was precisely what they needed. Times, dates, partial descriptions. With both sets of records, it should be obvious that Baelish orchestrated the poison's arrival. Tyrion stacked the documents carefully, then wrapped them in cloth. Thank you, Bronn. Go rest and keep your wits about you. My sister may come sniffing. Bronn tapped his sword hilt in acknowledgement before leaving. Pod lingered, unsure. Tyrion smiled at the boy. You've done more than enough. Go eat something before you topple over. I'll handle the next step. Once Tyrion was alone, he spread the documents on the table. Candlelight flickered over the words. He organized them by date, cross-referencing each item until the narrative was clear. Baelish had paid for shipments of suspicious goods from Lys, all pointing to the Strangler. That alone might not prove he had used it to kill Joffrey, but combined with Pycelle's testimony, albeit reluctant, that he recognized the symptoms of the Strangler at the wedding, the dots connected. Tyrion set aside a smaller pile for immediate use, the most damning pages, the clearest references. He carefully packed these into a plain leather satchel. Then he drafted a note to Tywin's scribes, indicating which items should be copied and how they should be summarized. The main risk, of course, was that Baelish's name appeared in the records as the one who had authorized the shipments, but not as the one who physically administered the poison. Someone else, likely Lady Olenna Tyrell or her agents, had slipped it into Joffrey's wine. Yet it was enough to implicate Baelish as the murderer, or at least the prime conspirator behind the poison's presence at court. Tyrion suspected the Tyrells might argue that Baelish had used them as pawns or tricked them with a ruse. Whether Lady Olenna was truly complicit or not, the official record would point to Baelish as the driving force. Cersei's earlier mania to blame Tyrion would look all the more foolish. He worked through the night, aided by a single quiet scribe Tywin had dispatched, and by dawn they had a clear dossier. The scribe, a middle-aged man named Albert, wrote in neat script, weaving the information into a narrative that left little doubt. Peter Baelish had acquired the Strangler, smuggled it into King's Landing, and orchestrated its use at Joffrey's wedding. Once the last page was inked, Tyrion sealed the dossier with Tywin's Golden Lion signet. Then Albert, yawning from fatigue, carried the entire bundle off to Tywin's Solar for final approval. Exhausted, Tyrion rubbed his eyes. He had not slept more than a few hours in 2 nights. Dawn light filled the windows, and he heard bells ringing from the city's steps. The new day's chores would begin soon, and he had to face them. He considered crawling into bed for a short nap, but a rap on his door announced that rest would not be coming just yet. He opened to find a grim-faced gold cloak standing there. "Lord Tyrion, the Queen Regent requests your presence in her private solar," the guard said. His voice was taut, as though he expected trouble. Tyrion's stomach twisted. Cersei must have learned something, or, at the very least, she was suspicious of his movements. He summoned a smile. "Lead the way." The walk through the Red Keep felt like a march to an uncertain fate. Everywhere, Lannister guards stood stiffly, and Tyrion sensed their watchful eyes. They arrived at Cersei's solar. The guard opened the door, and Tyrion stepped inside, immediately feeling the tension in the air. Cersei sat by the window in a carved wooden chair, her gown deep crimson, embroidered with gold thread. Her hair was coiled in an elegant arrangement that emphasized her proud features. Yet there was something wild in her eyes, a flicker of barely contained rage. Beside her stood Qyburn, hands folded in his wide sleeves. Jaime lurked off to the side, arms crossed, golden hand resting near his sword belt. The sight of Jaime there gave Tyrion a sliver of relief. Perhaps it meant the Queen Regent wouldn't simply order a guard to strike him down. Jaime might not allow it. Perhaps. Tyrion bowed. "You summoned me, sister?" She regarded him through narrowed eyes, not bothering with pleasantries. "What have you been doing?" "Scuttling about the Red Keep at all hours. I hear you've been collecting old ledgers, rummaging through shipping records." "Why?" Tyrion masked his tension behind a shrug. "I'm master of coin, am I not? Or near enough?" "The Crown's finances demand constant scrutiny, especially given the fiasco you left behind after Joffrey's wedding." Her hands tightened on the arms of the chair. "Don't mock me, dwarf. I know you're up to something. Something that concerns my son's murder. I won't have you meddling in matters beyond your station." Jaime cleared his throat softly. "Cersei." She cut him off with a sharp gesture, eyes never leaving Tyrion. "If you think you can bury the truth of what you did, think again. The realm might be fooled by forged documents or tampered ledgers, but I won't be. I will find proof that you killed Joffrey, or that you aided whoever did, and then I will see you burn." Tyrion's heart pounded. He forced a mild chuckle. "You had your chance to prove me guilty, sister. You failed. Even Father declared me innocent. Perhaps you should direct your anger where it belongs. Peter Baelish, who is rumored to have murdered your dear friend, Lisa Arryn, and taken the Eyrie for himself." Cersei stiffened. "Baelish may be many things, but he is no traitor to the crown. He served as master of coin faithfully for years. Why would he kill Joffrey? Why would I?" Tyrion returned. "Ask yourself that. Baelish stands to gain Sansa Stark's claim on the north, a foothold in the Vale, and a seat at the small council if he can return triumphantly having found the king's murderer, or simply by removing the king he disliked. He's cunning enough to do it and blame me." Cersei's lips parted in a sneer. You think I'll swallow that nonsense? You loathe Joffrey from the start. You always wore that sly grin when my boy squirmed under your barbed tongue. You never hid your hatred. Tyrion's face tightened. I won't deny I had no fondness for Joffrey, but hatred alone does not prove murder. You mistake scorn for motive. Baelish had a clear motive. Sow chaos. Climb the ladder of power. He's done it before and he'll do it again. She rose from the chair in a swirl of red skirts. Jaime shifted uncomfortably, as though anticipating violence. Qyburn took a half-step back, eyes flicking between the siblings. Cersei towered over Tyrion, her voice trembling with fury. You dare come to me with these pitiful lies, expecting me to set aside my grief for my dead son and embrace your narrative? I'd rather see King's Landing burn. Tyrion held her gaze. He could feel her raw anger emanating like heat from a forge. Cersei, he said softly, I know you love Joffrey, but if you truly want justice for him, open your eyes. The poison was the strangler, it wasn't mine. My father has already concluded as much. The only question is whether you will continue to chase me as a phantom culprit or join in the search for the true murderer. If you won't, Father will proceed without you. She clenched her jaw, and for a moment he thought she might strike him. Then her composure returned in a frosty wave, and she turned away, as if the very sight of Tyrion sickened her. You think yourself safe because Tywin sees a use for you, she said in a low hiss. But uses run out, especially for twisted little creatures who bite at their own kin. One day you'll be alone, and I'll be there to watch you beg. Tyrion's chest tightened at her words. He struggled against an urge to snap back with a savage retort. Instead, he kept his voice level. Until that day, sister, do try to keep your wits about you. King Tommen deserves a mother who isn't blinded by vengeance. Her eyes flashed, but she did not speak again. Jaime stepped forward then, placing a gentle but firm hand on her arm. Cersei, that's enough, he said quietly. She allowed him to lead her a step away, but her gaze remained locked on Tyrion, venomous. Qyburn cleared his throat and murmured that he would see to an urgent matter in the dungeons, then slipped out. Tyrion took his cue to depart as well, bowing quickly. He left the solar heart hammering in his chest. The exchange had been explosive, but at least it was done. She knew something was happening, yet she had no proof to present to Tywin, or she would have done so already. That gave Tyrion a narrow window to finalize the plan. As he made his way back toward his chambers, he nearly ran into Varys, who glided around a corner like a silent ghost. Tyrion paused, collecting himself. Lord Varys, he greeted, fighting the lingering anger from his confrontation with Cersei. What tidings of the realm this morning? Varys offered a smooth bow, his silk robes whispering around him. Oh, many tidings, my lord. Merchants complaining of new tariffs, sailors reporting sightings of strange ships off the coast of Dorne. A rumor that Princess Shireen Baratheon was spotted traveling north with Stannis' ragged army. But you, dear Lord Tyrion, seem preoccupied. Your sister's wrath, I presume. Tyrion exhaled. Not just her wrath, her madness. She's convinced I remain guilty of Joffrey's death. I fear she may do something drastic. Varys nodded sympathetically. The Queen Regent is indeed in a precarious state. One wonders how long Lord Tywin will tolerate her emotional outbursts, especially if she undermines his plans. But let us not dwell on that. I hear you've been busy with documents. Something about Baelish. Tyrion eyed Varys warily. Yes, or do you intend to deny you already know every detail? A thin smile curved the spider's lips. I do pride myself on being informed. Let's just say that if Baelish truly conspired to kill Joffrey, and I believe it likely, unmasking him is to the benefit of the realm. He's a cunning foe, but even cunning foes have weaknesses. Tyrion tilted his head. And you, Varys? Will you help ensure the Vale Lords receive the evidence they need? Varys spread his hands. If Lord Tywin so commands, I shall do my utmost. My little birds can carry messages swiftly, and if Baelish tries to slip away again, I might know which roads he would take, which ships he might hire. However, as you're well aware, I serve the realm first and foremost. If I sense that this plot will lead to more bloodshed and chaos, I might be forced to intervene." Tyrion understood the warning. Let's hope it leads to less chaos, not more. A world without Baelish's manipulations might be a safer world for King Tommen. Varys nodded once, then offered a short bow. "I shall take my leave, my lord. If you require my services, you know how to summon me." They parted. Tyrion continued on, returning to his rooms. Within the hour, a messenger from Tywin arrived bearing a fresh letter, the final copy of the dossier, signed by Tywin himself, addressed to the Lords Declarant of the Vale. It included a terse statement that the crown would not intervene on behalf of Peter Baelish. Tyrion read it over, heart pounding with satisfaction. This was it, Tywin's official stance. If it reached the Eyrie, Baelish would be left without the Iron Throne's backing. Any illusions that he acted with Lannister approval would be shattered. And if the Vale Lords chose to arrest him, no army would march to save him. At the bottom, Tywin had penned a brief note for Tyrion's eyes only. "Dispatch this through your channels without delay. Ensure the original documents do not fall into the wrong hands. Cersei must not see them until they have already reached the Vale. Then it will be too late for her to interfere. Tywin Lannister." Tyrion let out a slow breath. He carefully tucked the letter into the inner pocket of his doublet. There was no time to lose. He summoned Bronn once more, who arrived whistling, and told him to arrange for a discreet rider out of King's Landing that very night. A rider loyal to Tyrion alone, who would carry the sealed letter and the copies of evidence to Gulltown, then up the mountain road to the Eyrie. They would need the best blend of speed and stealth. Bronn scratched his stubble, nodding. "I know a man or two who can handle that. They'll want a good chunk of gold up front." "Then give it to them," Tyrion said, "and pay them twice as much upon their return with proof of delivery. Make sure they don't draw attention, no lion banners, no fancy gear. Just quiet men who can pass as merchants or travelers." Bronn agreed and left to make preparations. Tyrion sat alone, a strange mixture of anxiety and hope filling his chest. If all went well, the documents would reach the Vale in a few weeks' time, or faster if the roads were clear. Then everything rested on how the Vale Lords responded. Would they believe it? Would they act immediately? Or would Baelish slip away yet again, weaving lies to keep himself in power? That night, beneath a thin crescent moon, Tyrion watched from a hidden vantage in the courtyard as two riders departed, cloaked and hooded, leading sturdy horses loaded with supplies. Bronn saw them off with a casual wave, then turned and vanished into the shadows. Tyrion stood there, feeling the cool night air on his face, and let himself imagine Baelish in chains, forced to answer for Joffrey's murder, forced to confess or at least be condemned by the weight of evidence. He imagined the look on Cersei's face when her last reason to hate him for Joffrey's death crumbled. She might still hate him for 1,000 reasons, but not for regicide. A faint smile touched Tyrion's lips. He was exhausted, but the surge of possibility let him walk lighter as he returned to his chambers. Days stretched into a fortnight. Tension in King's Landing simmered. Cersei remained suspicious, and more than once she cornered Jaime to demand that he tell her what Tyrion was plotting. Jaime, caught between loyalty to Cersei and a reluctant sympathy for Tyrion, gave evasive answers. Queen Margaery Tyrell made quiet overtures to befriend Tyrion, likely sensing he held more sway with Tywin these days. Prince Oberyn continued to watch from the sidelines, occasionally offering cryptic comments. Meanwhile, Tommen tried earnestly to behave as a proper king but found himself overshadowed by his mother's presence and Tywin's authority. In council meetings, Tyrion played his part as master of coin, focusing on fiscal matters. He did not speak of Baelish or the Vale unless Tywin initiated it. Often, Tywin said nothing at all, merely giving Tyrion the briefest of glances, confirming their arrangement was on track. Finally, on a stormy afternoon, Tyrion sat in the council chamber with Tywin, Mace Tyrell, Pycelle, and Cersei. The Queen Regent looked impatient, drumming her fingers on the table. Rain pelted the windows. Pycelle droned on about fresh shipments of grain from the Reach when a sudden commotion erupted in the outer hallway. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. Mace Tyrell halted mid-sentence. Tywin frowned. The door opened, revealing a gold cloak with water streaming off his helm. "My lords," the guard said, breath ragged. "A rider from the Vale has arrived, claiming urgent news for the hand of the king. He bears a sealed letter, to be delivered in person." Tywin stood. "Bring him in." The guard hurried out. Cersei rose halfway from her seat, suspicion evident on her face. Tyrion kept his composure, though his heart thudded. Could it be word from the men he sent? The timing seemed right. Mace Tyrell looked confused, and Pycelle merely blinked. Moments later, a sodden messenger stumbled in, cloak dripping on the marble floor. He bowed low. "My lord Hand, I come directly from the Eyrie. The lords declarant send greetings and ask me to deliver this." He pulled a wax-sealed letter from inside his cloak. Tywin accepted it, breaking the seal with a flick of his thumb. He scanned the contents, face revealing nothing. Tyrion waited, tense. Cersei tapped her nails on the table. At length, Tywin set the letter down. "Well?" Cersei demanded. "What is this about the Vale?" Tywin's gaze slid toward Tyrion, then back to the Queen Regent. "It seems Peter Baelish has been arrested. The Vale lords took him into custody some days past, after receiving certain documents implicating him in both the murder of Lady Lisa Arryn and, more importantly, the murder of King Joffrey." A stunned silence fell. Mace Tyrell let out an incredulous noise. Pycelle's eyes grew wide. Cersei stared, mouth parted. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Baelish? Are you telling me they believe he had a hand in my son's murder?" Tywin's voice was crisp. "Yes, they state plainly that they have proof. Shipping records, witness accounts. They mention the Strangler. Now they ask how the Crown wishes to proceed. It seems they may try him in the Vale, unless we request he be brought to King's Landing." Cersei gripped the edge of the table. "Bring him here. I want him questioned by the Kingsguard. I want him tortured until he confesses the truth, that Tyrion put him up to it." Tywin's eyes narrowed in warning. "Daughter, we have no evidence Tyrion was involved. The Vale Lord's letter states explicitly that it was Baelish alone who arranged for the poison's acquisition." Her cheeks flushed a furious red. "You would trust them over your own blood? They're gullible fools, easily swayed by forged documents." At that, Tyrion spoke quietly. "Father, if the Vale Lords have seen enough evidence to arrest Baelish, it means they are quite certain. Littlefinger was always adept at concealing his tracks. For him to be caught suggests overwhelming proof." Tywin inclined his head. "Indeed, the letter says Baelish denies nothing. He claims it was all done by certain Tyrell conspirators, though he refuses to name them outright. But the shipping records match those discovered here in King's Landing." Tywin's gaze flicked to Tyrion. "The Vale Lords request guidance on whether to proceed with execution or transportation of the prisoner." Cersei slammed a fist on the table, making Pycelle jump. "We must have him here. Let him stand trial in front of the Iron Throne. I will not have some remote mountain lords pass sentence on my son's murderer. He must confess fully." Mace Tyrell looked uneasy, shifting in his seat. "My Lord Hand, if Baelish implicates House Tyrell, we must see that these claims are false. We cannot let his lies stand unchallenged. A trial might be wise, so we can unravel all threads." Tywin slowly nodded, as if weighing his options. "We shall request that Baelish be brought to King's Landing under heavy guard. If the Vale Lords consent, he will stand trial for regicide and the murder of Lady Lisa. Let us put the matter to rest once and for all." "Yes," Cersei hissed. "He'll come here, and then we'll see who truly arranged the poison." The meeting broke apart soon after, each member departing with tension crackling in the air. Cersei practically stormed from the chamber, and Tyrion watched her go, feeling relief mingled with apprehension. Baelish was in custody, an outcome better than he'd dared hope. But now the real test would come. If Baelish arrived in King's Landing, would he confess or twist the narrative to ensnare others, including Tyrion? He was cunning, and the man had wriggled free of dangerous traps before. The only difference this time was that Tywin Lannister himself, not to mention the veil, was set against him. Tyrion moved to follow the others out, but Tywin stopped him with a raised hand. They waited until Pycelle and Mace Tyrell were gone, leaving them alone in the council chamber's echoing space. Rain still rattled the windows, and distant thunder growled. Tywin regarded his son with an inscrutable expression. "You succeeded," he said quietly. "Baelish is undone. The Vale Lords took the bait and the proof. Well done." Tyrion inclined his head. "Thank you, father." A faint flicker of something that might have been pride crossed Tywin's features. "Still be wary. Your sister will not give up her vendetta easily. She will try to force Baelish to implicate you under torture, or cajole him into spinning some falsehood. You must remain vigilant." Tyrion took a breath. "I understand, but Baelish's own records condemn him. Any claim that I pulled his strings would be laughable in the face of that evidence." Tywin's gaze was ice-cold. "Laughable or not, your sister's influence is considerable. Men have lost their heads on flimsier accusations. Keep your guard up, Tyrion. This is a victory, but until Baelish is properly dealt with, it remains fragile." Tyrion nodded, offering a small smile. "Understood. Still, thank you for giving me the chance to prove my innocence." Tywin said nothing more, only turned away to gather his papers. Tyrion left, stepping into a corridor as a flash of lightning illuminated the windows. The thunder's crack soon followed, reverberating through the Red Keep. He felt as though the storm outside mirrored the storm within the castle. The coming trial, if it occurred, would make waves throughout the Seven Kingdoms. House Tyrell would be implicated unless Lady Olenna's direct involvement remained hidden. The Queen Regent's wrath would reach new heights if she discovered that Tyrion had arranged for the Vale to receive the damning evidence. One misstep and it could all unravel. He walked toward his chambers, deep in thought, only to find Jaime leaning against a pillar near a flickering torch sconce. "Brother," Jaime called softly as Tyrion approached. "A word." Tyrion halted. "Of course. I have a moment before I must drown myself in more wine." Jaime's face was pensive, shadows dancing across his features. "I overheard the announcement. Baelish is captured and might be brought here." Tyrion nodded. "So it seems. The Vale Lords have done the realm a favor, or so I hope." Jaime's gaze flicked over Tyrion's face. "I wanted to warn you. Cersei is in a rage, as you can imagine. She's convinced that Baelish will name you as his conspirator. She's telling anyone who will listen that you must have supplied him with the gold in exchange for the poison. If he arrives under guard, she'll do everything she can to make him say it. She's even threatened Qyburn with dire consequences if he fails to break Baelish's spirit through less savory means." Tyrion grimaced. "I expected as much. It's hardly comforting, but it changes little. The evidence is stacked against Baelish, not me." Jaime lowered his voice. "Be careful anyway. Men under torture will say anything, and Baelish is clever enough to craft a lie if he thinks it will buy him time. Even Father's authority might not save you if the entire city is whipped into a frenzy." Tyrion studied Jaime's expression. "You seem genuinely concerned." "Thank you." Jaime shifted his weight uncomfortably, golden hand reflecting the torchlight. "I don't want to see you die for something you didn't do. I failed you once when I let you languish in the black cells. This time, I will try to do better." A flicker of warmth touched Tyrion's heart. He managed a small smile. "You're a good man, Jaime. No matter what they say about you, I appreciate it." Then he added with a faint wryness, "Of course, you might also be the only one in the family who truly believes me innocent." Jaime inclined his head, the corners of his mouth quirking in a sad half-smile. He said nothing more and walked away, cloak swaying behind him. Tyrion remained in the corridor for a moment, collecting his thoughts. The day had delivered a blow to Baelish's ambitions, but the next blow could easily fall upon Tyrion if Cersei had her way. He could almost hear the Queen Regent's shrill voice demanding torture or trial by combat. Anything to see him destroyed. Retreating to his chambers, Tyrion poured himself a generous goblet of Arbor Red, ignoring the faint pang of hunger in his belly. The storm outside grew more violent, rattling shutters and spattering rain across the windows. Lightning illuminated the sky in pale flashes. Tyrion tried to focus on strategy. If Baelish indeed came south in chains, how best to handle the trial? Perhaps Tyrion could orchestrate a witness or piece of evidence that would further discredit any attempt Baelish might make to implicate him. Alternatively, he could encourage the Vale Lords to hold the trial there, safely away from Cersei's meddling. Yet the Queen Regent's demand was clear. She wanted Baelish's head in King's Landing, not in the Vale. He considered seeking out Oberyn Martell again. The Red Viper had a keen sense for manipulations and might relish seeing Baelish squirm. But Oberyn's ultimate loyalty was to Dorne, and if the trial threatened to overshadow his attempts to avenge Elia Martell, he might keep his distance. Another possibility was to quietly talk with Margaery Tyrell, who might dissuade her grandmother Olenna from panicking if Baelish accused the Tyrells. There were many threads, each tangled in the others, and overshadowing it all was the lurking presence of Sansa Stark, hidden away in the Eyrie. If Baelish fell, would she be freed? Would that pose a threat to Lannister rule of the North? Tyrion took another swallow of wine, wishing he could slip away from King's Landing altogether. But he was in the thick of it, like a knight in the midst of a joust with lances leveled. Only this time the joust was far more lethal. The hours dragged, and night deepened. Eventually, worn out, Tyrion dozed off in his chair, lulled by the rhythm of rain. He woke to pale morning light and a stiff neck. Groaning, he rose, changed into fresh clothing, and splashed water on his face. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a washed-out blue. Time to face whatever fresh disaster might come. Indeed, a sense of subdued excitement rippled through the Red Keep. Word had spread of Baelish's capture, and lords and ladies whispered about the impending trial. Some pitted him as a scapegoat. Others insisted it was about time he faced justice for his many manipulations. The common folk, bitter about rising prices and rumored crop failures, cared little for the subtleties. They just wanted a scapegoat for the troubles that dogged the city. Cersei wasted no time calling a meeting of the small council. The Queen Regent arrived in a gown of emerald green, her golden hair set in elaborate braids. Her eyes were sharp as daggers as she surveyed the council members. Tommen entered behind her, meek and wide-eyed, led by Ser Meryn Trant. Tywin was already in his seat, face inscrutable. Mace Tyrell sat to one side, fiddling with the rings on his pudgy fingers. Pycelle half-dozed, woken only by occasional prods. Tyrion slipped in quietly, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Cersei began at once, voice tense with barely masked hostility. "We have received confirmation that Peter Baelish is being escorted to King's Landing by a retinue of 50 Vale Knights, under the command of Ser Vardis Egan's successor, a certain Ser Michael Redfort. He is expected within a fortnight, perhaps sooner if roads allow. We must prepare for Baelish's trial." Mace Tyrell cleared his throat. "I propose we conduct a public hearing in the throne room, so all may witness justice served. The realm must see that King Tommen will not abide regicide." Cersei inclined her head. Yes, a public spectacle might be best. In the same manner as Tyrion's trial was begun. Tywin interjected smoothly. "We will not jump to conclusions. The trial must be fair. Lord Baelish, cunning as he is, may attempt to shift blame or cry innocence." "Yes," Tyrion echoed, matching Tywin's careful tone. "It must be clear to the realm that we seek only the truth, not a predetermined verdict." Cersei shot him a venomous glare. "We know the truth already." Tyrion spread his hands. "But the people do not. We must handle it with care." Tommy, perched on a small throne at the head of the table, spoke up timidly. "Mother, will I preside over the trial? I'm the king now." Cersei gave him a forced smile, patting his hand. "Of course you will, sweetling, but your grandfather and I will guide the proceedings." Tywin added, "Tommen, you need not say much beyond confirming the crown's interest in justice. Ser Meryn and the other Kingsguard will ensure Baelish's security." Tommen nodded, relief in his young eyes. He was plainly terrified of having to pronounce guilt or innocence before the entire court. Tyrion felt a pang of sympathy for the boy. Already, the weight of the crown bowed his shoulders. The meeting droned on, discussing logistics of lodging the Vale Knights, preparing the throne room, and ensuring no disturbances occurred. Tyrion listened, offering the occasional suggestion about crowd control. Cersei, however, mostly ignored him, addressing her remarks to Tywin. She could hardly stand to glance in Tyrion's direction. The tension was thick enough to taste. When the meeting concluded, they all filed out in stiff silence. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of anticipation. Additional Tyrell bannermen arrived in the city, boosting the guard presence. Cersei worked tirelessly to shape the narrative that Baelish was the vile murderer of her beloved son, while Tyrion had merely been a suspect in the earlier confusion, though she never quite admitted she had been wrong about him. The common folk, hearing talk of a Littlefinger who had grown wealthy at their expense, were eager to see him punished. Broadsheets circulated about Baelish's rumored misdeeds in the brothels, fleecing lords at gambling dens, and more. As for Tyrion, some corners of the city still whispered that he was complicit, but with each passing day, fewer dared to voice it openly, especially when Tywin himself gave no credence to the claim. Oberyn Martell observed these developments with sardonic amusement. When he encountered Tyrion in the corridors, he would quip, "Your net tightens around Littlefinger. Let us hope he does not wriggle through." Tyrion would respond in kind, acknowledging the risk that Baelish might spin an alternative story. Meanwhile, Margaery Tyrell quietly sought Tyrion's counsel on how best to navigate the upcoming spectacle. "My grandmother had concerns," she confided, "about what Baelish might say, but if it is all pinned on him, perhaps House Tyrell will remain untouched." Tyrion assured her that the documents pointed squarely at Baelish. Lady Olenna's role, if any, was safely veiled. Margaery seemed both relieved and oddly subdued, as though some shadow lay over her family's secret. Tyrion wondered if that shadow was guilt. Nonetheless, it served him no purpose to expose Olenna. Joffrey was dead, and Tyrion's only aim was to ensure no one believed he did it. At last, word came that Baelish and his Vale escort had been sighted on the Rosby Road. Tyrion stood at a window overlooking the gates, watching as the travelers entered the city by midday light. 50 knights indeed, riding in tight formation, their banners flapping. At the center rode Peter Baelish, wrists shackled to his saddle's pommel, forced to wear a plain tunic instead of the fine silks he favored. The lines of his face were drawn, his hair disheveled, but even at a distance, Tyrion could imagine the cunning in his eyes. Littlefinger would not go meekly to the headsman's block. The real battle had just begun. The Vale Knights escorted Baelish to the Red Keep, flanked by the City Watch, where a detachment of gold and crimson Lannister guards took custody of him. Cersei, Tommen, and Tywin greeted them in the throne room with measured formality. Tyrion stood off to one side, near a row of pillars. Servants and lesser courtiers looked on, eager for a glimpse of the infamous Littlefinger brought low. Baelish was forced to kneel before the Iron Throne, his shackles rattling. He kept his head bowed, but Tyrion saw the flicker of a smile ghost across his lips. Even now he was not cowed. Cersei's voice echoed in the hall. "Peter Baelish, known as Littlefinger, you stand accused of the murder of King Joffrey Baratheon and Lady Lisa Arryn. You will be tried on the morrow before the Iron Throne, so all may witness justice. Do you understand?" Baelish lifted his head slowly. His eyes found Cersei's, then flicked toward Tyrion, then to Tywin. "I understand, Your Grace," he said, "but I had hoped you would at least offer me a chance to speak in private. I have evidence of my own, evidence that might implicate others in the vile deed that took our precious king." Cersei's jaw tightened. "You will speak at your trial, not before." Baelish lowered his gaze again, but Tyrion did not miss the small smirk playing on his lips. He was preparing to sling mud. Tyrion only hoped the weight of the crown's evidence overshadowed whatever conspiracies Baelish might fabricate. Guards hauled Baelish away, presumably to a tower cell. The Vale Knights conferred briefly with Tywin, handing over additional statements. Then the throne room began to clear, courtiers drifting out in excited conversation. Tyrion lingered by a marble pillar, watching as Cersei swept toward him, anger radiating from her stance. She spoke in a low hiss so Tommen and others would not overhear. "You're pleased with yourself, aren't you? You couldn't kill Joffrey cleanly, so you used Baelish as your catspaw?" Tyrion cut her off, voice calm. "The entire city will see he had the means and the motive. Tomorrow, when the trial begins, you'll have your justice." She stared daggers at him. "If he breathes your name even once, dwarf, I will drag you into that throne room and place you on trial again. Evidence be damned." Tyrion inclined his head with the barest hint of a smile. "Then I suggest you pray his words, do not betray your own delusions." She made a strangled sound of rage, then turned on her heel and stalked away. Tyrion watched her retreating back with a mixture of satisfaction and dread. Baelish would face judgment, but if Littlefinger lived up to his reputation, the trial could be as much a spectacle of cunning lies as it was a straightforward condemnation. Tyrion knew Cersei would pounce on any accusation that cast blame on him. The city's tension was like a drawn bowstring, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. That evening, Tyrion took supper alone in his chambers, picking at roast duck and turnips. His appetite was meager. Pod hovered anxiously, offering more wine or spiced potatoes. Tyrion waved him off. The flickering candles cast dancing shadows, and every creak of the wind against the shutters made him glance up nervously. He half expected an assassin or one of Qyburn's horrors to slip in at any moment. But the night passed quietly, with only the usual murmurs from the Red Keep's corridors. Eventually, Tyrion lay down, forcing himself to rest. The trial would begin come morning, and he would need a clear mind to confront whatever twists Baelish threw at them. Dawn rose over King's Landing, bright and cloudless, as though mocking the darkness of the day's events. The great hall filled early with lords, ladies, and curious onlookers. Gold cloaks held them back from the front rows, leaving space for the highborn and the official dais where King Tommen and the Queen Regent would preside. Tywin stood beside the throne, Jaime at his side in Kingsguard regalia. Tyrion took his place among the small council seats, heart-pounding. He wore sober black and gold, the Lannister colors, but with minimal ornamentation. This was not a day for ostentation. Baelish was brought in under heavy guard, chains rattling. He looked composed, if pale, scanning the crowd with quick flicks of his eyes. Tyrion could almost see him cataloging which lords might side with him if he offered the right bribes or secrets. The hush in the hall intensified. Tommen, small in the massive iron throne, cleared his throat nervously. Cersei stood beside him, face grim. "Peter Baelish," Tommen began in a shaky voice, "you are accused of high treason and the murder of King Joffrey, as well as Lady Lysa Arryn. How do you answer these charges?" Baelish inclined his head. "I deny them, your grace. I loved King Joffrey as if he were my own kin, and Lady Lysa was my beloved wife, whom I did not harm." Cersei's hands balled into fists, and Tywin stepped forward. "We have the testimonies of Vale Knights who claim you pushed Lady Lysa through the moon door, and we have documents tracing shipments of the Strangler poison to you. The burden of proof lies against you, Lord Baelish." At that, the Crown's herald called forth witnesses one by one. Ser Michael Redfort spoke solemnly of how Lady Lysa's death was witnessed by several, though Baelish had claimed it was a suicide. A hush fell as other Vale lords offered statements from the Eyrie, claiming Baelish had quickly seized control after Lysa's death, installing himself as Lord Protector. Then came the matter of Joffrey's murder. Pycelle, summoned from his seat, haltingly confirmed that the poison used was the Strangler. Tyrion, trying to remain calm, watched as Pycelle presented shipping records, referencing Baelish's name or sigil. The court murmured in surprise. Even Mace Tyrell looked uncomfortable, well aware of the subtext that Olenna had slipped the poison during the wedding. Fortunately, the evidence placed the onus on Baelish's acquisition, not the final act. Cersei stood, glaring at Baelish. "You see, it was your gold that bought the poison. You killed my son. Her voice cracked. A murmur ran through the crowd. Baelish raised his eyes to hers, expression almost pitying. "Your Grace, I fear you misunderstand. Yes, coin changed hands, but not by my will alone. I was acting on behalf of another, a certain ally who demanded secrecy." Tension spiked in the hall. Tywin's gaze narrowed, and Cersei stiffened. Tommen looked bewildered. Baelish continued, voice smooth. "Indeed, I suspect the real architect of Joffrey's murder stands among us, feigning innocence. I ask only that I be allowed to speak freely, to name those who conspired with me." All eyes turned to Tywin, who took a measured breath. "Very well, speak. But know that if you lie, your punishment will be swift." Baelish shifted, chains clinking. "My intentions have always been for the good of the realm. I sought to unmask the true danger to King Joffrey. It was Tyrion Lannister." He pointed across the hall at Tyrion, who felt his breath catch. A low ripple of shock or excitement passed through the crowd. Tyrion sensed Cersei's triumphant glare on him, but Baelish raised his bound hands, continuing, "Who approached me, lamenting the cruelty of his nephew and urging me to secure a certain poison from across the narrow sea. He said it was only to frighten Joffrey, to teach him a lesson. Yet once the poison was in hand, I suspect Tyrion or his agents slipped it into the king's cup. I was horrified when I learned of Joffrey's death, but by then it was too late." A roar of hushed exclamations filled the hall. Tyrion's pulse hammered. He stood, mouth set in a grim line. Tywin rapped his knuckles on the table for silence. "That is a serious accusation," Tywin said, eyes flicking between Baelish and Tyrion. "What proof have you?" Baelish gave a theatrical sigh. "Alas, any letters or accounts I kept were either seized or lost. Tyrion is clever enough to ensure he left no trail. But I have my word. I have always served House Lannister faithfully. Why else would I risk so much to become master of coin in their name? Tyrion threatened me, insisted I comply." Cersei was trembling with a mixture of fury and triumph. "You see?" she hissed. "He forced it upon Baelish." Tywin turned to Tyrion. "Tyrion, have you any response?" Tyrion steadied himself. "Father, lords and ladies, Baelish is lying to save his own skin. He weaves a story he cannot corroborate. Meanwhile, the evidence of shipping records, paid for with his personal coin, stands firm. If I had been behind it, would I be foolish enough to let the payments come from an account bearing the Mockingbird sigil? Or to have them signed by Baelish's men, not my own?" Baelish interjected. "You used me as a catspaw, my lord. You needed plausible deniability." Tyrion shook his head, voice rising. "I had no reason to kill Joffrey. A fool might claim I hated him, but that does not constitute proof. You, however, gained a great deal. You fostered chaos and used it to seize the Vale. If you served House Lannister, why would you murder Lady Lisa Arryn, their ally in the region? No, your entire story reeks of desperate invention." Tywin's voice cut through the din enough. "We will not settle this with mere words. The records are clear, and Baelish's claims lack any supporting evidence. Peter Baelish, do you have a single witness who can testify that Tyrion approached you about poison?" Baelish's gaze flicked about the hall, searching for a friendly face. None emerged. Varys stood quietly in the back, expression unreadable. Mace Tyrell avoided his eyes. Oberyn Martell watched with keen interest, arms folded. Finally, Baelish spoke in a subdued tone. "I cannot produce such a witness, my lord. The arrangement was private." Cersei's expression darkened, though some flicker of uncertainty passed through her eyes. She seemed torn between wanting Baelish to be credible and suspecting that he was simply manipulating the story. Tywin turned to the Queen Regent. "The Crown's case stands on the shipping records, the sworn statements from the Vale, and Pycelle's testimony. Baelish's attempt to shift blame onto Tyrion is unsupported." Cersei opened her mouth, faltered, then turned a blazing look on Baelish. "Then he lies." Her words shook with fury. "He dares to slander my brother here in the presence of the king, with no proof? He must answer for that as well." Baelish's composure wavered for the first time. He glanced at Tyrion, as though realizing his gambit had backfired. Perhaps he had expected Cersei to leap at the chance to condemn Tyrion, but the lack of evidence was too glaring. Tywin would not abide a sham verdict that contradicted the physical records. The hall felt charged as though a storm hung overhead. All waited for the final sentence. Tywin raised his voice to be heard by all. "Peter Baelish, you stand guilty of murdering King Joffrey Baratheon and Lady Lisa Arryn, having provided and facilitated the poison which took his grace's life. Your attempts to blame Lord Tyrion lack any basis in fact. Therefore, in the name of King Tommen, I sentence you to death. The manner shall be beheading, tomorrow at dawn." A hush fell. For an instant, Tyrion saw genuine fear flicker across Baelish's face. Then the man's mask returned, and he gave a small, resigned nod, as though refusing to beg. Gold cloaks seized his arms, and he was led away, the crowd parting before him like a disturbed sea. A swelling murmur followed him out, some gasps of satisfaction, others of shock. As soon as Baelish was gone, the great hall erupted into excited chatter. Lords and ladies exchanged incredulous glances. Tyrion sagged against the back of his seat, feeling a wave of relief so intense he nearly laughed. He caught Oberyn's eye, who offered a knowing smile. The Queen Regent looked momentarily disoriented, then recovered, stepping to the dais and embracing Tommen as if to shield him from the uproar. Tywin remained in place, unmoving, the architect of the day's outcome. Then slowly, he gestured for the hall to empty. The trial was done. Tyrion waited for the throng to thin before slipping out a side door. His mind reeled. Baelish condemned, the final blow to the rumor that Tyrion had killed Joffrey. Yet he did not feel the triumph he expected, only a bone-deep weariness. Blood would be spilled at dawn, and Baelish's final breath would take with it any chance to unravel deeper conspiracies. Lady Olenna's involvement, if any, would remain unspoken. Sansa Stark's fate in the Eyrie was still uncertain, though presumably safer now with Baelish gone. Tyrion told himself this was for the best. Let Sansa remain free of Lannister schemes for as long as possible. Night fell on King's Landing. A tense quiet settled over the Red Keep. Guards doubled around Baelish's cell, ensuring no last-minute escape. In her solar, Cersei drank heavily, according to rumors. Tommen was put to bed early, still trembling from the day's excitement. Tyrion took a single jug of wine to his room, dismissing Pod to get some rest. He sat in a chair, the events of the trial cycling through his head. Baelish had tried to name him, but it carried no weight. Tywin and the documented evidence had won out. Perhaps that was the final blow to any lingering doubt in the realm. Tyrion Lannister was, at last, truly free of suspicion for regicide. But freedom in King's Landing was always relative. Cersei would nurse her grudges. If the day came that Tywin was gone, or the realm slid into chaos again, she might revisit her vengeance upon Tyrion. For now, however, the immediate threat was gone. Tyrion toasted to that. He drained his cup, letting out a heavy sigh. Would the city be better off with Baelish's head on a spike? Time would tell. Littlefinger had spun so many webs that cutting him out might unravel many things, for good or ill. When morning came, a pale hush lay over the Red Keep. Tyrion rose early, skipping breakfast. The execution was set for dawn, in the courtyard before the main gates. A small crowd gathered. Lords, ladies, knights, a handful of commoners allowed inside to witness justice. Tyrion joined the circle, feeling a strange numbness. The headsman, masked and silent, stood waiting, a large sword resting across his palms. Peter Baelish was led forth, still in chains. His face looked gray, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, but he held his head high. He spotted Tyrion in the crowd, offered a small mocking smile, then turned his gaze to the dais where Tywin, Cersei, and Tommen stood. The boy king looked nauseated, shifting his weight as if wishing he could run away. Cersei stared fixedly at Baelish. Tywin gave a curt nod, signaling the headsman. A hush fell like a shroud. Baelish did not plead. He knelt before the block, The headsman raised the sword, shining in the morning light, and with a single swift stroke, ended Petyr Baelish's life. The crowd let out a collective breath, some gasping, others stoic. Blood pooled on the stones, forming rivulets that slowly trickled away. The mockingbird had been silenced forever. Tyrion looked away, suppressing a shiver. In a city where cruelty was commonplace, he found no pleasure in this beheading. Baelish might have been his enemy, but the finality of it weighed on Tyrion's soul. Lives were pawns in the Game of Thrones, and Petyr Baelish had been a formidable player. Yet even he could lose. A wave of uneasy sadness enveloped Tyrion. So many lost, so many sacrificed on the altar of power. Cersei turned to the crowd, lifting her chin. "King Tommen has avenged his brother Joffrey this day," she proclaimed. "Let all who would harm the crown see the fate that awaits them." Tommen flinched, but said nothing, letting her speak. The onlookers bowed or curtsied, murmuring agreement. With that, the grim ceremony concluded. Soldiers covered Baelish's body, hauling it away. The crowd dispersed into hushed clusters. Tyrion lingered, staring at the reddened flagstones. Then he, too, left, feeling not triumph but a curious emptiness. Yet the ramifications were immediate. Word raced through King's Landing that Littlefinger, once master of coin and a fixture of the court, had died a traitor's death. Merchants who had ties to him scrambled to distance themselves. Brothels he once owned fell into disarray. Some men claimed to have been blackmailed by him, now freed from that threat. The city trembled with the aftershocks of a man who had sown chaos for years. Tyrion could almost sense a collective exhale, as if some malignant presence had been excised. By midday, Tywin convened the small council to discuss the aftermath. Cersei arrived appearing strangely calm, as though her thirst for blood had been sated by Baelish's execution. Mace Tyrell offered a guarded smile, relieved his house had emerged unscathed. Pycelle prattled on about the necessity of reorganizing the city's finances once again, now that Baelish's secret holdings might revert to the crown. Tyrion listened in silence. Tommen sat quietly, overshadowed by the adults. After an hour, the meeting concluded, and Tywin signaled for Tyrion to remain. The others left, including Cersei, who barely glanced at Tyrion. When the room was empty, Tywin spoke. "The Vale Lords have sent a final communiqué expressing their thanks for our restraint in letting them pass judgment on Baelish's wrongdoing," he said. "In truth, I suspect they're relieved Baelish died here, so they don't have to handle the matter themselves. They confirm that Lady Sansa Stark remains in the Eyrie, though some say she may travel to her uncle's seat at Riverrun or remain with her cousin, the boy Lord Robert Arryn." Tyrion nodded, concealing his relief that Sansa was at least alive. "What do you plan to do about Sansa?" Tywin glanced at him. "Nothing at the moment. The Vale is no threat. She can stay there as a guest or a ward. If she attempts to claim the North, she will find the Boltons entrenched. For now, it matters little." Tyrion understood the subtext. The Lannisters had no immediate use for Sansa. Better to let her remain out of sight, out of mind. And if one day the North rose again, they could always address it then. "Very well," Tyrion said. "I have no wish to bring her back here. She's suffered enough." Tywin studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "I suppose she has. Now, regarding the finances, without Baelish's meddling, the Master of Coin's office falls squarely on your shoulders, Tyrion. We have debts to the Iron Bank that must be renegotiated. See to it. And if my daughter attempts to interfere, inform me." Tyrion recognized that final statement as a measure of trust, or perhaps a means of controlling Cersei. Either way, it gave him the authority to manage the realm's purse without her sabotage. "I will handle it," he said. Tywin dismissed him, and Tyrion departed, a strange lightness in his step. With Baelish gone, many of the old plots had unraveled. A new dawn might be emerging, one in which Tyrion held a more secure position at court, recognized for his cunning rather than spurned as a scapegoat. Yet he was not fool enough to believe the danger had passed entirely. Cersei's hatred still burned, even if she currently aimed it at the memory of Baelish. War might reignite in the north or the south at any time. The Greyjoys or Stannis Baratheon might strike again. And somewhere across the narrow sea, rumors whispered of dragons stirring. But for the moment, Tyrion felt the closest thing to victory he'd known since the day he led the defense of King's Landing against Stannis. He walked the corridors, noticing how the servants no longer shrank from him. Some even offered polite bows. The rumor that Tyrion had engineered Joffrey's death was fading like a bad dream. Now, some might call him a hero for exposing the real murderer. He would not let that flattery go to his head. Survival was reward enough. If the city wanted to make him a hero, so be it. But he would remain cautious, mindful that King's Landing had a short memory for who was favored and who was condemned. That evening, Oberyn Martell invited him to share a meal in a private dining hall. Tyrion accepted. He found Oberyn and Illyria Sand reclining among plush cushions, sampling spiced wine from Dorne. The heady aroma of peppers and sweet plum filled the air. They greeted him warmly, and Tyrion settled on a cushion across from them. "Well?" Oberyn purred, swirling his cup. Littlefinger's head parted ways with his body. "You must be pleased." Tyrion sipped the spiced wine and winced at its potency. Pleased isn't the word I'd choose. Relieved, perhaps, and still wary. The death of a snake doesn't mean the vipers are gone. Illyria smirked. "A fair point, my lord, but at least you needn't fear another trial for regicide. The realm saw the evidence with their own eyes." Oberyn tilted his head. "If you are no longer suspect, what will you do with your newfound freedom? Remain here, dancing in your father's shadow, or venture forth and find your own path?" Tyrion considered the question, feeling a pang of longing for some distant horizon. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me dreams of escaping this city of lies. Another part wonders if I can do some good here, perhaps for Tommen's sake. He's just a boy, and the vultures circle him daily." Oberyn raised his cup in a mocking salute. "A noble sentiment. Perhaps you will shape King's Landing into something kinder, or at least less cruel." Tyrion gave a thin smile. "I've no illusions about changing this city's nature. But maybe, for a while, I can keep it from devouring itself." They drank to that. The conversation drifted to other topics. Dornish feuds, rumors of Sellswords across the sea, the uncertain stability of the Iron Islands. Tyrion found he enjoyed their company more than expected. Oberyn's candor, Illyria's playful wit. Both were refreshing compared to the stiff courtesies of King's Landing. After a few cups, Tyrion felt a relaxed warmth spread through him. He momentarily forgot the gloom of the day's execution, focusing instead on the possibilities that lay ahead now that Baelish's shadow no longer hovered over his head. When the meal ended, Oberyn and Illyria slipped away, likely to indulge in more intimate pleasures. Tyrion returned to his chambers, ironically sober despite the spiced wine. The future felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. But at least the most dangerous puzzle piece, Baelish, had been removed. King's Landing might see calmer days, or it might see new waves of chaos. Tyrion no longer pretended to predict the tide. He only knew that, for once, he stood in the light rather than the shadow of suspicion. That night, as he drifted to sleep, Tyrion's last thought was of Sansa Stark, far away in the Vale. Freed of Baelish's manipulations, she might finally find some peace. He hoped so. Perhaps, in time, she could reclaim her name and her rightful place in the North. He wished her well with a sincerity that surprised him. Then, burying himself under the blankets, he let the day's tension recede and surrendered to slumber. In the weeks that followed, life in King's Landing settled into a new rhythm. Tommen's rule continued under the firm hand of Tywin Lannister. Cersei remained Queen Regent in name, but her influence waned as few could ignore her failed crusade against Tyrion and her reliance on Baelish, who turned out to be the true murderer. The small council recognized Tyrion's talents as master of coin. Trade improved, roads were maintained, and the crown's debts began to shrink through careful negotiation with the Iron Bank. The common folk, still battered by war and famine in places, saw slight improvements in bread distribution. Whispers spread that the imp had a kinder hand than the Queen Regent. More than once, Tyrion overheard a merchant praising him for simply doing his job. He took no pride in it, just relief that he was no longer reviled as a monster. Cersei, furious at her father's continuing dominance, tried to rally certain lords to her side, but Lord Tywin swiftly undercut her efforts. The City Watch took its orders from Tywin, not from her. Even the Kingsguard, nominally led by Jaime, would not act on her rogue commands. Bitterness ate at her, and she drank more, sullen and resentful, but she could find no immediate recourse against Tyrion. Too many people had seen the trial, had read the documents. A second attempt to accuse him would only make her look desperate. Tyrion maintained a cautious stance, ensuring his personal guard was always near. He did not trust that Cersei wouldn't try an underhanded tactic, perhaps a staged robbery or an assassin in the night. But as the days turned to weeks, no threat materialized. Jaime offered him occasional updates, confirming that Cersei had grown increasingly isolated, confiding only in Qyburn and a few remaining loyalists. Tommen was left mostly to the tutelage of Tywin, forging him into a pliant ruler. The realm at large seemed to breathe easier without Joffrey's cruelty or Baelish's schemes. Though overshadowed by war's aftermath, it was a small respite. At length, Tyrion felt secure enough to take short rides beyond the city walls, escorted by Bronn and a handful of guards. The countryside still bore scars from the War of the Five Kings: burned farmsteads, orphaned children, broken men wandering. Tyrion saw it all and felt a quiet ache. It reminded him that no matter how cunning one might be at court, real lives suffered beyond the Red Keep. He took to distributing small bits of coin or supplies where he could, though it was a drop in the ocean of need. Still, it was more than most lords did. Word reached the city that the imp had a generous streak. Some mocked it as a ploy for popularity, others found hope in it. Meanwhile, from the Vale, sporadic news drifted in that Robert Arryn was ill again, and that Sansa Stark, sometimes called Elaine Stone, was managing affairs on his behalf. No mention of any new marriage arrangement for her. Rumors hinted that the Lords Declarant were divided on how best to handle the future of House Arryn, but so far, they seemed content not to provoke the Iron Throne. The Aerys gates remained closed to outsiders. If Sansa found a measure of peace there, Tyrion wished her well. And so time passed, with King's Landing forging a fragile sort of stability. The shift in power did not solve all problems. There were still tensions with Dorne over past grievances, still rebellious lords in the Riverlands, still the question of what would happen once Tommen came of age and wanted full authority. But for Tyrion, the immediate threat had passed. He was no longer an accused murderer, no longer overshadowed by the possibility of execution at his sister's whim. He had proven his innocence, shaken Cersei's power, and exposed Peter Baelish as Joffrey's true killer. The realm might never fully appreciate his role in unmasking the conspiracy, but it was enough that he had survived, and in surviving, he had carved out a place for himself at court once again. Sometimes, in the quieter moments, Tyrion would recall the look of shock on Baelish's face at the trial, the moment he realized Cersei would not automatically believe him over Tyrion. It was a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, alliances and assumptions could pivot in the span of a heartbeat. Tyrion took no pleasure in the memory of Baelish's beheading, but he took satisfaction in having outmaneuvered a master manipulator. It was a testament that no matter his stature or the hatred directed against him, Tyrion Lannister had a mind sharp enough to navigate the deadliest intrigues. Perhaps, he thought to himself, that was the key to living in King's Landing. Remain one step ahead of your enemies, forge alliances carefully, and never let your guard down. He intended to do just that. Whatever the future brought, whether it was dragons from the east, rebellions in the north, or fresh plots from Cersei, he would face it with a keen mind and a steady hand. For the moment, at least, Tyrion was free of the specter of Joffrey's murder, and that was no small victory in a place where victory was often paid for with blood. On one bright afternoon, Tyrion stood on the Red Keep's battlements, gazing at the city below. The air smelled of salt and fish, with a gentle breeze from the sea. He could hear the distant hum of thousands of voices, the city's pulse. King's Landing was never silent, never still, forever teetering between greatness and ruin. Yet for now, The ruins of the war were beginning to mend, and a new generation seemed poised to grow in relative peace, if only for a time. He closed his eyes, imagining for a moment that he could see all the hidden corners of the city, the secret chambers, the bustling markets, the labyrinthine slums. He thought of the power swirling beneath the surface, the unseen hands that would shape events. But he was no longer relegated to the black cells or forced to defend himself against spurious charges. He was, improbably, a lord of some significance, recognized in his own right, with the ear of his father and the grudging tolerance of the court. And all because the truth of Joffrey's murder had come to light, or at least enough of it to damn Peter Baelish irrevocably. A voice behind him roused him from his thoughts. It was Bronn, leaning casually against the stone merlin. "Admiring your kingdom, my lord?" Tyrion snorted softly. "Hardly my kingdom, but I'm admiring something, I suppose. Are you bored now that I'm not on trial for my life every other week?" Bronn grinned. "A little, but there's always trouble if you know where to look. And I'd rather be bored than watch you lose your head." They stood in companionable silence, the wind ruffling their hair. Tyrion felt a faint stir of contentment. The future was uncertain, but he was still standing, still breathing, still able to enjoy a view of the world from the heights of the Red Keep. That, in itself, was a victory few would have predicted months earlier. And so it was that Tyrion Lannister, proven innocent of regicide in the public eye, reshaped his fate in King's Landing. Cersei's power diminished, Baelish's cunning undone, and the realm's gaze turned toward fresh concerns. Tyrion remained vigilant, for in the Game of Thrones, peace was often just the quiet between storms. But for the moment at least, the storm had passed him by, and he stood unbroken, a testament to wit, persistence, and the stubborn refusal to accept the role others had thrust upon him. It was not a grand and glorious triumph with fanfares and cheering crowds, but it was enough, and in the shadows of the Red Keep, that was all one could truly hope for.